People that honestly believe they have been abducted by aliens. What was your experience like? I never told anyone this story because I never thought they would believe me. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I live with my significant other and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state traveling for business. I woke up in the middle of the night. Wasn't sure of the time, but it was completely dark because my body was freezing cold. I actually like it cool when I sleep and usually have the temperature around 70 degrees or colder since I live in central Texas. But this was different. I was ice cold, but wrapped in blankets. It was the middle of summer, so evenings aren't cold. When I grabbed my phone to look at the time, it seemed to be off, and I pressed the on button, but it didn't turn on. Since I was half asleep, I shrugged this off. I walked out of my bedroom to go adjust the thermostat and noticed that the cats weren't around. This was weird because these furballs are always hanging out in the bed or around the bed. Anyhow, I walked to the thermostat and tried to adjust it, but the power to the thermostat, I have a Nest, was NIL, and the power to the house seemed to be off. I peeked out of the upstairs window to see if any of my neighbors were having power issues and noticed that all of their outdoor lights were working just fine. From the time I woke to this moment was probably 1 to 2 minutes maximum. I decide to wander downstairs to grab some water, but am startled when I realize there was a glow of light coming from the first floor. The way my house is situated, I couldn't see the light until I had approached the stairs. I found this odd because the power seemed to be out just upstairs, which didn't make a lot of sense. I started walking down the stairs and began to hear a faint humming noise. The noise had a high pitch to it, with arbitrary pulses of low sounds, almost like a muffled weed whacker that someone is throttling at random. As I continue to walk down the stairs, I spot a dark, slowly moving figure in the room with a light at the bottom of the stairs. The next step that I take feels like I walked off the side of a cliff or was sucked into the floor. That is really the best way I can explain it because I don't remember what happened after that moment. I just lost all feeling from my body. My next memory is waking up again to the sound of my phone's alarm. Everything seemed back to normal. I sat there in bed, cats back to being lazy in bed next to me, and tried to think about the 2-minute incident that happened in the middle of the night. I am not a sleepwalker, and I was definitely not dreaming. My security systems app shows the time whenever the door is opened or closed. I realized that my security system was disarmed on the app and that the front door had been opened and closed several times throughout the night. I pulled up my security footage from the exterior cameras and was surprised to learn that there was 0 footage from the entire night. Like the motion sensors reacted to a random car driving around at 10 p.m. and then the next thing is another random car in the morning. So someone or something walked in and out of my front door, but the cameras did not capture any footage. My neighbor across the street has a good security system that points at my house, so I asked if he can review the footage from his cameras. I told him some made-up story about how I thought someone had broken into my truck. Anyway, he said it was weird because when he pulled up the footage from that night, his cameras did not record anything, just a large time gap once again. My first thought was that I was sleepwalking and that the memory was a dream, but it just couldn't have been. When I looked out of the window in the middle of the night, I distinctly recall a red pickup truck parked in the wrong direction in front of the neighbor's house. I always notice when cars are parked left wheel to curb because I've gotten a ticket for this in the past. Anyhow, the truck was not there before I went to sleep, based on footage, but was there in the morning, based on the footage. So the truck was there when I saw it in the middle of the night. I definitely woke up in the middle of the night, cold as ice, no cats, no working phone or thermostat, saw the truck out of the window and then got warped by something on the stairs. A couple additional things were different in the house. The security system was disarmed, and I definitely armed it before going to bed. The light was still on downstairs, and that was absolutely off before I went to bed. My whole body smelled like burnt marshmallows. I know this is weird, but it's really how it smelled. And lastly, my 55-gallon fish tank that sits at the bottom of the stairs in the entryway was missing 2/3 of the water. Seriously, where the F did 40+ gallons of water go? The whole area around the tank was bone dry and the fish were fine. I think I was mind-effed by some thirsty aliens. Story 2. I was home alone in this little house I lived in the middle of nowhere. It was probably around 2 a.m. and I was just listening to music, enjoying having the place to myself for a change, when all of a sudden, my dog started going crazy. Normally, when someone pulls in the driveway or comes up to the back door, they go to the door they heard the noise beyond and peek through the blinds to see who it is. But this night, they are running all around the house from door to door, barking louder than they ever do. When I stood up to go see what the heck they were on about, I noticed that the whole house seemed to be lit up with a deep blue light. Turning into the living room, it became obvious that it was emanating in from each window. I put on my shoes to go outside and see who was out there, but by the time I got out there, the light had faded away. There was no sound of a car engine or really anything. And where I lived, you could hear a car coming from a mile away. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I had the weirdest sense of fight or flight, where neither option seemed viable, like I was frozen to the spot. I wanted to turn around and get back inside, and then I just was. Right back in the chair I was listening to music in, as if I just blinked, and there I was. Don't really like telling people about it because it skeeves me out so bad. Story 3. Not entirely sure if we were abducted, but my wife, who was a non-believer, and I both have missing time. We were having relations on our bed when we suddenly both came to, and were in totally different places in the room. Not sure how much time had passed, but she looked at me and just said, "What the F just happened?" And I said I wasn't sure. Neither of us were scared, and we were both incredibly tired. We decided we would just go to bed and talk about it in the morning. I looked up instances of missing time, and a lot of them said the same thing. When they came to, they were just very tired. Knew something was totally weird, but just wanted to go to sleep. Edit. We had a carbon monoxide detector, fully functional. It was an apartment, not a house, so it was routinely checked in, up to code at all times. Edit 2. First, for those saying we automatically assumed it was aliens then, no, please reread the first 7 words of my story. We do not know, by Googling missing time, you will find a heavy correlation between that and abduction stories. Secondly, the wife is out of town for the night. I'll throw an edit up in the morning if she wants to chime in about it. Edit 3. Okay, the wife texted me, and she wants to add something. It was the day we got engaged. Of course she wants to add that because I forgot. Oops. She said it was like she fell asleep during intimacy, and she woke up, but she was already sitting up and I was standing at the door. She remembers that we both came into consciousness at the exact same time and were disoriented, but felt like everything was okay. She's hesitant to say aliens, abduction, or even something spiritual, but she exclaimed something happened. Never expected this to blow up in any way, but alas, the detectives of Reddit, my favorite ones, have amassed to find the answers. Unfortunately, we may never know, but maybe that's what keeps us alive in the first place. They are out there. Story 4. I was living out in the boonies with my mom. I was 15 years old. I had been talking with this girl on and off for weeks, and I was on the phone with her. It was just before dark when this chick was telling me that if I come over to her house, she will sneak outside to hang out with me as soon as her parents go to bed. Luckily, she only lived like 2 miles away, and I had a bike. A raging hormonal teenager. Didn't take long to decide right then and there I was gonna make that trip. Luckily, my mom always went to bed super early as well. She texts me sometime after 10 p.m. that her parents went to bed. It's on. I leave for her house. As I'm riding my bike down these dark country roads, I see almost exactly what you described you saw. Orange, glowy lights in a triangular formation. They were just hanging there still. I stopped for a second to get a better look because there were some trees obstructing my view, and they started looking bigger the more I looked at them. I started to feel this really weird sensation that I can only describe as similar to vertigo. I completely black out. I wake up, and I'm still on the side of the road, but not where I was before. I got super confused and couldn't quite figure out where I was for a minute. I pull out my phone to look at the time. It's dead. My bike is nowhere to be found. I start heading down the road in what I thought was the direction I came and suddenly realized where I was. I was in the opposite direction of my house from where I started. Like I was on the same road, just on the other end of it. I turn around when I realize this and run home. I get home and plug in my phone. It's like 2 a.m. and I have a bunch of missed calls and texts from that chick asking where I'm at. I go to bed and sleep like crap the rest of the night. The next day I call that girl and I tell her what happened. She sounds skeptical. I ask her what time she called me the first time last night after I left. She said she called me at around 11 p.m. and it wouldn't go through. I left sometime after 10. I know my phone was at nearly full battery because it was on the charger before I left the house. I do find my bike later that day in the same place I remember stopping. It was just laying there on the side of the road. And I remember having really crazy dreams and a bad headache for a couple of weeks after this happened. You know, after the first couple weeks, I never really had dreams much anymore, and I still don't. Not sure if it's related at all though. I can't say for sure if it was aliens or abduction or whatever, but I'll be honest. I'm not normally an anxious guy, but being outside alone at night has creeped me the F out ever since. Staring into the night sky gives me anxiety when I'm by myself now. F everything about that night. I'm not even sure I want to know what happened. Story 5. About 20 years ago, I was walking home from the shops with my dad, and we stopped to watch some really odd lights in the sky. There were 2 lights, slightly bigger than the stars, zooming around and orbiting each other, making figure eights, etc. And then they stopped moving, got bigger and bigger until bright light filled the sky, and then they were gone. We carried on our journey home. We hadn't stopped for more than 5 minutes. The whole journey should have been 20 minutes. When we got home, my mom was freaking out. We had both been gone for over an hour. Our watches were both still working, but were 45 minutes behind every clock in the house. She had neighbors and friends out about looking for us. I don't know what happened to us or what we saw. Maybe it was nothing. Edit. There was no search party organized. I worded myself badly. My mother simply had nearby neighbors and friends who would lived on or near our route home checking to see if they had seen or could see us because it was winter with freezing temperatures outside. It was a dark country road we were walking home alone, and I was only 8 years old. We also didn't have mobile phones yet and weren't prone to detouring. Story 6. I had a year-long experience of strange events that I've never been able to explain or have a full memory of. It started in winter, working up north on a project. Our crew was put up in a motel of 10 minutes outside of the largest town in the area. I somehow got upgraded to a king-size bed with couches. Nice room. Our days were long, so I used the couches to stack my clothes in piles, jeans, hoodies, etc. I had brought my entire desktop computer with me and was in the middle of a massive argument with my ex over Facebook Messenger at 1 a.m. during the second week up there. At some point, I opened my eyes, and I was sitting on top of a pile of hoodies on the couch. The time was now 4 a.m. I rushed over to the computer. At some point after 1 a.m., I had stopped typing a sentence midway through. My ex had left a ton of messages throughout the night demanding I answer her back. She also left missed calls and texts on my phone that was still sitting beside the mouse. I figured I had somehow passed out, but wasn't sure how I ended up on top of my hoodies on the couch and not just fell into bed. Went to sleep normally for the remaining couple hours before work. A couple of days later, a stranger scenario happened. My routine was we'd finish work, I'd come back to the motel around 9 p.m., shower, change, and drive into town for late night dinner at Boston Pizza, only restaurant open late other than McDonald's. So this particular night, I went through my routine, took a shower, changed, headed for the door. I got to my car, and when I turned it on, something felt really wrong. I looked at the time. It was now 2 a.m. I had no idea how I had lost around 4 hours between showering and getting into my car. It felt weird. My whole body felt weird. I felt violated. Like an SA victim would describe waking up from being assaulted while passed out. You feel violated, but you have no idea what happened. Not a single memory or explanation. I stayed up all night, scared crapless, trying to figure out what happened. Why was I missing 4 hours? If I had passed out, why didn't I wake up on the floor? Why did I feel violated? The rest of the project, nothing else happened. But once I got back home, things started happening that were just as weird. There's more to my experiences if people want to know. It only lasted for about a year, but those 2 events were the starting catalysts. I've never actually figured out what happened, but most people I've asked all seem to agree it had to be an abduction. Edit. Wow, this sure blew up. Rip my inbox. I'll try to answer as many replies as possible. Thanks for the gold. These events happened from 2011 to 2012. My job at the time also included 4 trips of 3 weeks duration to both that town and another town 40 minutes away from the initial town where the first 2 missing times occurred. In my research, I found out the first town where this happened was and is a hotspot for UFO activity. As to the carbon monoxide question, My landlord required it and still does. It gets inspected twice a year along with the smoke detectors. I don't know, however, if any of the motels and hotels I stayed at had carbon monoxide detectors. Pretty much a few weeks after I started avoiding sleep when I felt the events coming, and would make a point of staying in high populated areas at night, these events stopped and have not returned since. The residual left behind of me not wanting to sleep at night, sometimes I chalk up to fear that comes from this event. Same with closing the blinds in all rooms at night. If I want to go to sleep, I have no problem doing so since the event, and I haven't experienced any similar dreams since either. For the first month or so, nothing happened further, but then something weird started happening. I began waking up around 2 a.m. and not being able to fall back asleep until the sun came up. I would wake up and have the urge to turn on every light in the apartment and stay up, find things to do, and wait until sun up before I could finally go back to bed. I started to notice that in my dreams, random strangers would show up telling me to wake up. If I tried to ignore them in my dream, they would find ways to harass me and tell me to wake up. To wake up. It's really important. I have to wake up. Then there was a really vivid dream. I had gotten dressed up in this dream and driven to an upscale hotel. I have no idea what the context of this dream was. When I got to my hotel room in the dream, someone started knocking on the door, shouting, "Hello? Hello!" over and over again. Just when I was about to open the door, the phone rang. I answered, and the voice on the phone told me not to open the door. I kept telling whoever was on the phone that I really should see why this person keeps knocking, but the voice kept urging me not to answer the door. I finally hung up the phone, headed to the door and opened it, and woke up in bed in a cold sweat. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't go back to sleep. These were the kinds of dreams I had over and over. People trying to get me to wake up, and random flashes of bright white light that would light up everything no matter where I was or what time of day it was in my dream. I remember one dream being outside in the middle of a sunny day, and a bright white flash that overpowered the sun. And usually at this point, some random person in my dream would run up to me and urge me to wake up, or tell me the flash wasn't part of my dream and I should wake up. Random people in your dream telling you you're in a dream and that you have to wake up is creepy as F. And they were always strangers. Nobody I ever knew in real life. A precursor to these dreams was the urge to go to sleep early. I would have these urges to drop everything that I was doing and get in bed, sometimes leaving the lights on, the TV on, in the middle of games, the middle of eating, etc. There was no fighting it. I would put down the controller or put my fork down and march right to my room and lie down. It was this weird, zombie-like drowsiness, but I would always wake up after 2 a.m. and not be able to go to sleep again until the sun was back up. During the summer, I took a trip to upstate New York with a friend, and we stayed at some motel overnight before heading further for our trip. That night, I remember knocking on my door, and someone who kept yelling, "Hello? Hello?" just like in the hotel dream. I remember my friend was fast asleep, unfazed by the knock, but I ended up going to the door and unlocking it. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up sitting on the office chair by the desk around 6 a.m. I checked, but the door was locked and nothing had been taken. It didn't look like anyone had entered. I woke my friend up and asked if he'd heard knocking during the night. He said no. I told him what happened, and he was pretty upset that I would wake up in the middle of the night to open the door to a stranger. But there was no sign that I did, or that someone had come in, just that I somehow ended up on the chair and not the bed. I still feel like I was awake when I went to answer the door, though. The weird thing was these dreams and urges to go to sleep wouldn't always happen. Maybe 2 to 3 times a week, but I was starting to fear going to sleep without the lights being on, all blinds closed, or I'd fight to stay up all night and just go to sleep during the day. After this, I was getting really fed up with how effed my sleeping schedule had become, and I started to notice when I'd get the feeling that I should go to sleep. I would take that as a cue to get in my car and head for the busiest section of the city at night I could find, filled with people. And I'd notice that the urge to go to sleep would go away instantly. So every time I felt the urge to drop everything and go to sleep, I would fight the urge and drive downtown. Anytime I felt like I was being watched too, I'd get in my car and I'd go downtown. It must have worked, because after a few weeks of doing this, all these strange urges to go to sleep randomly, dreams with flashes of white light and people telling me to wake up, they all went away. I haven't had a single recurrence of these events since. However, I noticed I still have a fear of going to sleep until the sun comes up that I'm always fighting. I also recently noticed that pictures of the typical gray alien now scare the crap out of me, and I hate looking at them. Even seeing the cartoon ones on South Park, I get mini panic attacks. Those pictures had never bothered me before in my life, but now they send me into waves of panic I can't explain. I still have no explanation for the missing time up north, the weird dreams, or that one night at the motel in upstate New York, which I don't think was a dream. It felt very real and felt more like another missing time event. Most people I've told don't know what to make of it. My current girlfriend has noticed I obsess with making sure all blinds are closed with no open slivers no matter where I sleep. I told this story to someone at a party once, and the guy came out and told me his abduction story and was pretty positive I had been getting abducted during that entire year, and that they'd either gotten bored of me or I had become a hassle with constantly trying to drive to places full of people to avoid the happenings. Other friends either offered no explanation or believed some sort of abduction scenario was taking place. Who knows? I have no memory of physically being abducted, but those weird feelings of being watched, being urged to go to sleep, feeling violated when waking up, that crap felt real and still bothers me. Added bonus, last year I fell asleep on my girlfriend's bed while she stayed up watching Netflix in the living room. I left the lights on. At some point in the night, she came to turn the lights off and says I woke up screaming and yelling, "F off, leave me alone, help, don't touch me." She said it was the scariest, most blood-curdling thing she'd ever heard, and that was literally seconds later I had passed back out and was asleep again, and she couldn't get me to wake up. Creepy. Story 7. I really don't know if I was abducted or not, but I witnessed something pretty unexplainable. My ex and I were driving out of my suburban neighborhood super late one night on the way to go eat Waffle House or something. As we're nearing the exit to my neighborhood, I look up into the sky, and we both notice these 3 really strange orange lights in a triangle formation. We then stopped the car in the middle of the road to figure out what the F we were looking at. These lights didn't have the quality of lights you see emitting from a plane or a star. When you look at stars, they are so far away that they almost seem 2D. But these lights, these ones felt 3D somehow. These lights were much bigger and seemed closer, like high enough into the sky to be well above the trees, but not above the clouds. And they were just floating there, not moving up, not moving down, left or right, but eerily still. I really don't know how to explain how still these things were, but it was unnatural. And I know that sounds stupid, but that's how it felt when I saw them. And I wish I could explain it better. But when I saw this, I was both mesmerized and sort of in shock. I've always been a UFO enthusiast and always wanted to see something bizarre like this, and finally it was happening. I couldn't take my eyes off of what I was looking at, and I feel like I didn't for like over an hour. I really don't know how much time passed, but it really did feel like an unnatural amount of time. Finally, these globes of light just abruptly dissolved away, kind of like they were sucked into a black hole or something. We break our gaze and look at each other, and my ex asks me if I saw what she saw. And yeah, we couldn't come up with an explanation at all, and still don't. To this day, no one believes me, and I don't care. I saw what I saw, and I'm now fully confident we are not alone. Story 8. In 1997, 3 of my friends and I were driving down a long, winding road to my house at around 10 p.m. I was in the back seat. It was very cold, February or early March in New Hampshire. Suddenly, my friend driving says, "What the F?" My friend in the passenger seat starts saying, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." The 2 of us in the back seat are craning our necks trying to see, and then directly in front of the car, a bright light dilates and then gets smaller. The car is at a crawl now, and we're all looking up astonished as 4 to 5 other lights dilate and recede. They grow to about the size and brightness of a police searchlight and then get so small that they disappear. This part is going to sound insane, but we were all there and we all saw it. We pulled over on a shared driveway that has a good view because it's on a snowy hill overlooking a reservoir. The reservoir is frozen solid with enough ice to ride a truck on for all you swamp gas naysayers. But now there is nobody else around, just the 4 of us in the freezing cold. We get out of the car and look up, hoping to see the lights. We saw lights all right, but they were acting very differently. High above us were large elongated lights shaped like lozenges. There were about a dozen of these, and they just kind of hung in the air, milling about slowly in various directions. These occasionally got brighter and dimmer, and what really freaked us out were the smaller lights, the size of bright stars which exited from the sides of the larger lozenges. These would emerge, 4 or 6 at a time, and then they would start moving quickly back and forth and side to side very quickly in changing direction instantly. Then they would start squiggling about very erratically before stopping, moving alone or in tandem with others, before retreating to the lozenges. Meanwhile, others were emerging from other lozenges, so there was a constant busy display of these little ships zooming about, almost as though they were dancing with each other. It was insane, and thinking about it now, it is so vivid in my mind that it seems like yesterday. We stayed outside for an hour before we couldn't take the cold anymore. My friends dropped me off at the bottom of my half-mile-long driveway so as to not get stuck on the ice. My driveway was poorly maintained, and I was embarrassed to have friends at my house anyway because my dad was an alcoholic and we lived off the grid. But anyways, after they pulled away, I looked up but saw nothing. No sign of any UFOs, but there were trees here, so I couldn't see as well. Then I had a sudden twinge of panic. It was a deep panic, overwhelmingly horrified but also still in shock about what we had seen. I was suddenly afraid to be out there alone. I ran up the driveway, ice be darned, and snuck into my room where I probably didn't even sleep. I don't recall. We have all spoken of this since. For the first few days, we were still in awe, but we never really seemed to be telling anyone else at school about it. At least, I didn't. I don't know how the others were dealing with it. We slowly stopped talking about it altogether. About 7 or 8 years later, I met up with a couple of them, and I asked if they remembered. I was afraid I'd made the whole thing up and that it was a dream, or maybe I was going crazy or I had been crazy at the time. They both remembered in the same detail as I did, although we were all a little embarrassed to ever discuss it again. Story 9. I can answer this one. For starters, I'm 21 years old now. I'm a guy. When I was 13, I was a chubby, curly-haired goof, and I was excited for my birthday within the next week. I had been getting very little sleep due to the mixture of excitement for the giant cookie I requested as my birthday cake and school stress rubbish. Bullies, really. It kept me up at night for a few nights. So this experience might be caused by a mix of sleep deprivation or night terrors. I have had night terrors semi-frequently my entire life. Anyway, I was getting ready to sleep and snuggled into bed when I realized the lights were still on. So I sit up in bed and peek at my window. My view is obstructed mostly by a blanket covering the window, and my bed was in the corner of the room. So I only had a small view of the window, and I lock eyes with a gray head covering my entire view and beyond the window. Next thing I know, it was morning, and I was tucked back into bed with my lights still on, but my window cracked open ever so slightly. I told my parents about what happened at breakfast, and they told me to stop lying for attention. I lost a little bit more sleep from the experience and got over it pretty quickly. It never happened again. Not too fascinating. I am a believer in aliens due to the size of the universe. However, I don't fully believe it was an alien I saw. A little bit of me wants to believe that it wasn't extraterrestrial. We had a big playground with a giant field not even 200 yards from our house we could walk to through the woods. So maybe it was an alien who parked his car and was just snooping around real quick. Edit. When I say car, I of course mean spaceship. I'm not joking around giving an innuendo to illegal aliens. Story 10. Posted this somewhere else once. Was camping in a campground in North Georgia with some friends. It was starting to downpour, so everyone left their tents in the woods and decided to rent one of the on-site cabins for everyone to sleep in. I decided I'd just sleep in my car because they wanted to stay up late and I was tired from all the kayaking that day. I woke up to the rain stopping, and it was kind of cold in the car. I had forgotten my sleeping bag in my tent. I checked the cabin to see if there was any room left, and the light was on and everyone was fast asleep. 3 a.m. I didn't want to squeeze in, so I decided to trek my way to my tent in the dark with a small pen light. In order to get to my tent, I had to pass by everyone's that they left. Mine was the last one, and even then was 50 feet at least from the previous tent before it. I got in my tent, covered up with my sleeping bag, and prepared to catch the last few hours of sleep before sunrise. No more than 10 to 15 minutes from me getting in my tent, I began to hear light whispers right outside my tent door. They weren't in English, and to my recollection, indecipherable. Not any language I had heard ever at all. Just as the voices started, 2 orbs appeared together outside the tent. They weren't the same glare as a flashlight would make, and both were of two different colors that, to the best of my ability, had no real color. Just colorful? The whispers outside the tent began arguing louder between each other, but still in a hushed tone. And as the whispers grew louder, the lights began swirling around the tent, behind me, to the side, to the front, not in the movement that one could make with a flashlight. And at this point I realized there were no footsteps that could be heard. I uncovered myself and knelt on the tent floor, preparing for the zipper to come undone like in a horror movie. I was flipping through my mind on what option to take. I was the most terrified I'd ever been. Fight or flight, here it comes. The lights swirled faster and the voices grew louder, but still breathy and whispery. My mind raced and I was sweating despite the cold. And then, just like that, the lights shut off like a switch and the whispers stopped, and nothing but silence of an empty wood. I stood there, as still as I could, and I didn't dare go outside that tent till the sun came up. It was, and still is, the scariest moment of my life. I hope this makes sense. I've never written it out before. If I need to answer anything, I can try in between moments at work. Interesting enough, I went to a horror movie premiere recently, and there was a scene that had the voices in it, and goosebumps ran back up my arm. I swear to you, it was identical. How are we doing, guys? I'm not gonna lie to you, I forgot I was supposed to be interjecting comments on most of these. I was getting so into the stories. I've never been a big alien guy, and I've never had an experience. It seems the common theme is in the middle of the night, a passing time with a cold chill. I'll be on the lookout, maybe I'll have an experience soon. But I know a lot of you guys like to fall asleep to these stories, and may you stay safe throughout this night. Story 11. Oh boy, here we go. This is going to be a long and very hard to explain one, and to clarify, I didn't think I was abducted, but my friend did. So I was about 15. Every night, a guy I'll call Jay and I would sneak out at about midnight and go back home around 4 to 5 in the morning before our parents would wake up for work. On one particular night, we had just snuck out and it was about 1 a.m. We headed to my backyard, laid on the trampoline and stared at the stars and talked like we always did. Now, if you're in a room right now and you look around, you'll see the definite four corners where your ceiling and walls meet. You can see how square they turn, edge of wall, sharp turn, second wall, same with your ceiling. You can see each individual flat surface. The sky did that. It went from staring at the stars to looking like a cube of sky. From the southeast corner of the sky came this giant UFO. I mean huge, as if it took up a quarter of the entire sky. We both stared at it in dead silence. It didn't make any noise, even as it moved. And while it spun, it was only hovering straight. The spinning didn't move it like you would imagine a frisbee doing. The sides just turned while it moved. I guess what it looked like didn't matter, but Jay and I had our eyes dead set on it. We didn't say a word. We didn't point to show the other person. As it began coming toward us, we both flipped over. Again, no hints, no talking, no eye contact. In total sync, we flipped onto our stomachs and laid as flat and quiet as we could. Now ducking from something sounds totally normal and instinct, but that's not what this was. It was literally almost like telepathy. I can remember us having a mental conversation of stay flat and it won't see us. Don't move. We watch it make a weird angled C shape across the sky. And although it felt totally in slow motion, it could have only been a few minutes because I think both of us held our breath the entire time. Now for the weirdest part. As soon as it was out of sight, boom, daybreak. We had literally just gotten to the yard, and I know it was 1:15 a.m. because I checked, but the minute we felt released from laying flat, it was very bright, like 7:30, 8 a.m. bright. I don't remember talking to him at all afterwards, other than making eye contact, and then making a break for our homes before our parents noticed we weren't there. A few weeks, even months maybe, I'm talking to my brother's girlfriend about what had happened. Apparently she's real into that crap, but also completely terrified. She said the fact that it felt like a few minutes, but then it was suddenly 6 to 7 hours later truly 100% makes her think we were abducted. She was serious. I made a joke about how I should go to hypnotherapy to unblock the memories, and she deadpans and says, "Don't. People who were abducted are traumatized by what happened to them. They even get PTSD. The next day she texted me about how she couldn't sleep. I think abduction is a little bit of a stretch, and she watched too many Discovery Channel documentaries, but the weird loss of time still irks me. I do know what we saw was 100% real. Aliens? I don't know. Abduction? I'm certainly not sure. Story 12. This happened to me when I was 10 years old in Calgary, Alberta in 1970. I was walking home from school, cutting across the school sports field. Our house wasn't far. We lived across the street from the school. There wasn't any other kids around since I had stayed late for a volleyball practice, and the rest of the students had gone home 45 minutes earlier when school let out for the day. It is about 4:30 in the afternoon. Something caught my attention from the corner of my eye, and I stopped and turned to the right to look at it. Floating directly above a house facing schoolyard was a large UFO. I was in the middle of a football field, so this was about 60 to 70 yards distant from where I stood. The UFO is big and almost touching the roof of the house. It is completely centered on the house, but it is so big, it's also above the house on the left and the right. The lots there are 50 feet wide, which puts the UFO at about 150 feet across and perhaps 25 to 30 feet tall. It is very bright, giving off a harsh white light which is difficult to look at since it hurts my eyes. I look away back towards my house and see a car and a motorcycle on the side street which intersects the street with the UFO. That street is about a half block away, and I remember being surprised and confused that the drivers are not reacting to the UFO, which clearly must be visible to them, and so obvious since it is so bright, but the traffic continues as normal. At that point, I become aware that something is forcing me to turn my head back toward the UFO. I'm turning, and my field of view is changing, but I'm not the one doing it. I struggle to turn away, but I simply can't control any of my body. I remember a feeling of panic. Then the next thing that I can remember, I'm walking into my house. It is about 9:30 at night now, and dark outside. I cannot recall anything of the last 5 hours. My parents were furious with me for being so late. Apparently, my parents and my 2 brothers had been trying to find me for hours. A voice or thought in my head tells me to tell them that I'm not feeling well and I need to go to bed. I have no idea where that voice or thought came from, but I do exactly as it suggests and run upstairs to my room and go to bed. The next day, I still can't seem to explain what happened, and my mother is even more angry with me since my new school shoes are ruined, since the tops of them are all scuffed and dirty, like I was dragged face down across the ground with my feet still on the ground. I told my older brothers what happened, and they suggested I keep quiet about it since nobody would believe me. Good advice, as it turns out, since in many years since, most of the people I have shared the story with don't really know what to say afterward. Many years later, I was looking at my old school workbooks from that time, and they are full of drawings of UFOs, all of the same design, and with more detail than I can recall from memory. For example, in my memory, I can't remember seeing any windows in the UFO, since the light was too bright to make out details. But in my drawings, there were large round windows all around the UFO, some with faces looking out. Story 13. I was about 8 or 9, and my mom tells me we are going on a day trip to meet her high school friend. Cool. I grabbed my Game Boy Advance because I know my mom's friend has kids my age and wanted to show them the racing game I had. I overheard this from my mom talking with her friend at her house. They told me to leave the room because they needed to talk about adult things. Little, innocent, curious me wonders what exactly are adult things that I can't hear. Were they going to throw some new juicy cuss words out? Well, Mom's friend had a little girl who would sleepwalk at night. Started when they moved into their new house in Northern California. It was a suburban area, but not too suburban. New neighborhood with a lot of empty homes and forest patches in between each community. She was about 4 years old, and they found her one night in the backyard, just sitting there. After that incident, they decided they need to lock her in her room at night and bar up her windows so that she doesn't end up in the woods nearby or anywhere besides her room, really. The story: Mom's friend and husband wake up to a loud boom on the side of the house in the middle of the next night. Felt like something hit the house because everything shook. They check on their boys. They're good. They didn't hear anything and go back to sleep. They check on their daughter, unlock the door, and realize she isn't in her room. They start to freak out. Then they hear a knock at the door. They open it. It's the effing sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter. They ask her where she's been, and she said, with the men down the street. Upset, Dad sees 2 guys in coats walking down the street. He yells at them and starts sprinting for them. Mom's friend says coat guys don't react at all. Coat guy turns the corner. Dad turns the corner, and they're gone. Mom and Dad check the lock and windows. There's no tampering. They notify the police, who pretty much say there's nothing much they can do, but will keep an eye out. The sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter is fine. isn't scared at all, just tired and goes back to bed. After that, my mom didn't understand why I was scared as heck that night. She believes she was abducted but refuses to tell me what happened. Even my dad tells me that he can't tell me the story. Says it's for my mom to share if she wants it shared. But overhearing this when I wasn't supposed to hear it had me tripped out as a kid. Watched The Fourth Kind later in life and was scared of that movie too. Friends all laughed at me saying it was stupid, but they didn't know about my mom's friend's story. Story 14. When I was in the 6th grade, I woke up one day with 4 very small holes on my upper right thigh. It looked like the skin had been cut out in perfect tiny circles, yet there was no blood. The circles were in a straight line and across my thigh horizontally, no more than 6 inches wide completely. I also felt very tired and couldn't remember what I had dreamt, which is weird for me since I pretty much remember every dream I have every night. I put band-aids on them and went to school as usual. The next morning, I wake up and there are 3 new holes, right above the previous 4. I woke up once again very tired and drowsy and was now weirded out by how symmetrical everything was that I showed my mom, who said it was most likely an ant or spider bite. Next morning, 2 more holes above the previous 3, and the morning after, 1. This is when I was seriously scared since the holes now formed a triangle that pointed to my knee, and they weren't scabbing over. I was so tired and confused and was scared to go to bed, so I stayed up really late, but woke up the next morning, not even knowing that I had ever fallen asleep, only dark and then morning. When I did wake up, I was suddenly very alert. When I threw my blanket off my legs, I found all the holes completely gone. No scabbing or scarring or any trace of the circles on my thigh. I showed my mom and she just brushed it off as they had healed like any other cut. I'm honestly not sure if this is related, but I do feel like there is a correlation. After this, I couldn't really comprehend math anymore. I had excelled at math all my life, but after this incident, it was like numbers had no meaning to me, and I couldn't figure out simple equations. I went to an advanced school and had been learning algebra and geometry and was doing great, but then it was like poof, all my math knowledge and comprehension was gone. To this day, I can't even do simple addition problems without double checking them. Story 15. As a kid, I lived in a tiny mountain town in Central Oregon. We were very poor, and instead of having a bedroom, I would sleep on a futon in the living room with my younger sisters in our double wide. One night around the age of 10, I was woken up by the room flooded with a bright white light. At first, I thought a semi must have overturned on 97 and was shining on the curtains. I decided to get up and see what it was. But to my surprise, I wasn't able to move at all, much like sleep paralysis. I tried to yell out to my sisters so they could help me, but just as I couldn't move, I found myself unable to speak. At this point, I was in a full-on panic attack. Then one of your stereotypical gray aliens passed through the wall and floated me out through the wall to a flight of navigation-shaped craft. The intense light that bathed me made it impossible to see. Suddenly, an oxygen mask was put over my face and I blacked out, as if on anesthesia. Some undetermined amount of time passed, and my vision started to become unblurred. I was back in my futon, light still filling the room as the alien looked down at me. Using some sort of telepathic communication, they said to me, "I'm going to inject this into your neck. It won't hurt, won't leave a mark, and it will make you think this was all a dream." They progressed to inject my neck and then float off through the wall. The light faded away in an upward direction, leaving me to stare into the darkness. Slowly my eyes adjusted to the dark, restoring my night vision without ever opening my eyes. Must have been sleeping with my eyes open. I woke up from this dream, looked over at my sleeping sisters, climbed out of the futon, walked into the kitchen and ate a sweet cherry pepper. I followed that with a glass of water and immediately went back to bed. Today, I'm still sure it was just a dream and I have a great dream recall. I don't know if I think this because it keeps me from looking crazy or if it is exactly what the alien in my dream said that the shot would do. Story 16. The abduction started when I was really young. They were not scary experiences, but more like odd dreams. Every night I would sneak down to our living room, which had a large window. I would face the window and say, "How, how." After that, a large wolf head would materialize and say, "How," back to me, and my next memory would be waking up. I was never caught getting out of bed or getting down the stairs. but I do remember that occasionally there would be leaves or dirt on the living room floor that my parents had no clue where it came from. We moved into a suburbs, and that changed the nature of the experiences. I don't remember being afraid when I lived in the country, but once I lived in the suburbs, I was terrified of going to sleep. My first memory of an abduction experience was caused by a doctor's visit. Someone I went to school with got sick with something, and everyone who had contact had to get a shot. I had never had a shot before, but when the nurse approached me with the needle, I lost my crap. I was probably 9 or 10, but it took 3 nurses and poor old Dr. Lee, my pediatrician, to hold me down. I remember telling them to get that thing away from me and getting images of shadowy figures and flashes of pain in my eyes. After that, I was always awake when they came. I'd wake up and they'd be next to my bed or looking in the window, but they never tried to hide their intentions after that. The abductions peaked around 13 or 14, with about 1 every 2 months. By that time, I had adjusted my life to try and deal with it, going to sleep as soon as I got home from school and waking up at around midnight and staying awake until I went to school hoping it didn't happen. It might have worked, but it didn't help with school and family life. Slowly, the incidents became less frequent to maybe once a year. My last abduction was on my 27th birthday. I was fully conscious and had just got done calling into work, saying I would not be coming in that night. I walked outside to my car and looked up and saw something moving through the sky. It was black and amorphous and kept changing shape. At one point I thought it looked like the space shuttle, but then it started heading towards me. I got in my car and tried starting it, but it didn't even turn over. Right after that, I got this buzzing, ringing in my head that was jarring and painful. By then, the craft was right over top of me, and ahead of my car, one of them just materialized and moved towards me. My car door just kind of opened on its own, and it touched me with this rod thing it was carrying, and I blacked out. I came to an hour later and immediately went to work, even though I called off. I haven't had any experiences since, but I still live the way I did when it was happening. I can't sleep at night, so I work at night and sleep during the day. Relationships were difficult to maintain, but I'm doing much better now. I have some feelings that my parents were slightly aware that something was going on when I was younger. I've had several experiences of waking up some distance away from where I was previously or sleeping at. Twice, I was wearing clothes that were not mine. If anyone has any questions, I'll answer as best I can. Thanks for asking this, seriously. Story 17. In the 90s, my family lived in a coastal city in Saudi Arabia. My parents were doing up the flat we lived in, so my brother and I had to sleep on the same king-sized bed for a week or so. I was probably around 10 years old, and my brother was 13. One night my brother started shaking my shoulder, trying to wake me up, saying, wake up, do you see this too? I don't know what the time was, but it was dark. I was under my duvet and I had no idea what he was talking about. I opened my eyes and saw this featureless, lanky, tall person made of dim light. It was standing by my brother's side of the bed. Before I could process what was happening, it extended its neck over the middle of the bed between my brother and I and disintegrated into tiny lights across the room with a massive static sound. My brother and I screamed and hid under our duvets. Next thing I know, I wake up in the morning at the exact same time as my brother, and we just look at each other and run out of the room. We have talked about this incident a few times over the years, and we still don't understand what happened. A mutual shared episode sleep paralysis? Monoxide? We had our windows open, the flat was ventilated properly. My parents don't remember hearing any unusual sounds. They slept soundly in their room. I asked my brother when he noticed this thing as he woke me up. He remembers waking up to a glow in the room, opened his eyes and saw this thing of light walk up to his side of the bed and just stand there with a soft humming sound coming out of it. He thought he was dreaming, so he tried to ignore it and turned to his other side. He looked back after a while and it was still there, so he decided to wake me up. I have no idea what to make of this incident. I'm over 35 years old now. I've had a few incidents over the years that I can't explain, but I'm healthy, so I guess it's all good. Story 18. Well, we weren't abducted, but my husband and I had a UFO encounter that still boggles my mind to this day. We live in an apartment complex in a highly populated, nicer urban area. We arrived back at home late on a Saturday night, about 1 a.m. Walking from the parking garage back to our apartment building, I happened to look up at the sky. I immediately noticed this huge triangle-like object slowly guiding above us, and we watch as it disappears behind another building. Meanwhile, both of us are arguing over what the F this thing was. It was silent, zero noise, with 2 rows of lights on either side. We walked around the side of the building, looking into the sky, and about 10 minutes later, we see it again. It was closer and clearer this time. I could even see minor details on the body, the lights and all. We are both almost screaming at this point, what the actual F is this thing? As we watch, this thing pulls straight up into the air and slowly disappears right in front of our eyes. Not kidding. We watched this thing slowly become transparent until we couldn't see it anymore. We kept looking for it for about another hour. Cell phone cameras pointed to the sky from the top of the tallest apartment building. We finally gave up and did enough research to compare what we saw to a stealth bomber plane. The shape is similar, but this thing was completely silent and could disappear. Where we live is home to tons of tech company headquarters, literally across the street from us. We are next to 2 major highways, and it's generally a super busy area. I'm only mentioning this because it seems like most UFO encounters happen in rural and not so populated areas. I'm still freaked out. I'll always be freaked out, and I'll always be checking the skies at night from now on. Story 19. Throwaway, as this is something that has ruined my life before. This is honestly hard to type and talk about, as there's definitely some PTSD issues related to it. At around 11 or 12, I started waking up with memories of being up in a ship, seeing aliens, the typical grays. I had been fascinated with aliens all my upbringing, more on that later, and thought it was awesome. I told people at school, and teasing and bullying got so bad I eventually changed schools. I told my mom, and I got a simple, that's nice. My parents were separated, so I only saw my dad rarely. But that year when I saw him, I started talking about it, and that's where a lot of things started falling apart. He was a huge Jesus freak and immediately started getting mad at me for talking about that stupid alien crap again. And as he berated me for past events, he brought up a bunch of times in the past that I had talked about aliens, said I had an alien friend, or times I had been with them. Up until then, I had no recollection, but as soon as he started talking about the instances, I remembered them. One of the things he brought up was when we got a shirt with aliens on it a few years ago. I had talked a bunch about them. I distinctly remembered the shirt, just not talking about them. During that time, I ended up at my grandma's, who I stayed with a lot as a child. I brought up that I had thought I had been abducted, and she laughed, mentioning that I was talking about that again. I asked her what she meant, and she told me that when I was little, I would scream and fuss and refuse to sleep in my room, that I wanted to sleep in the living room so the aliens could take me away, so that I could go with them. They didn't see the harm, so they'd let me, and I'd fall asleep again, no problem. Again, once told about the events, I started to remember them. This started to really scare me. If my dad and grandma were tinfoil hat types, I would question them, but they both adamantly disbelieve in aliens. They're not in the Bible, and would never ever play along to such things. The fact that it had been a continuous thing all my life with repressed memories was terrifying. I started to go back and really think on my life, and worked on remembering things. I remembered several times seeing mummies, which I now think are what very little me made the gray-head bodies to be. I remembered being terrified to be exposed out of the blanket, but would eventually leave some parts out, thinking, if they want to study my arm, they can study my arm. And I would wake up with odd, thin cuts on whatever part I left out. The most danging thing, though, was remembering frequently going to the vacant lot next to my house, looking for UFO landing prints. After all this, I was obviously certain of my experiences and vocal about it. I ended up having to see a psychiatrist and a psychologist. Psychiatrist diagnosed me as schizotypical. Psychologist vetoed it, saying that anyone who believes in God could qualify, and given the amount of reported alien abductions, it wasn't his place to say that it never happened. During my times of talking about things, I met someone who knew a lot about aliens and psychic phenomena, and that if they were seeing me all my life, I probably had some potential. For the next couple years, I found myself down a crazy rabbit hole of conspiracy theory stuff. In addition, I had done some psychic tricks, mind reading, remote viewing, telepathy, verified by people who did not believe me. You are probably hearing this thinking it's super ridiculous and crazy. So does everyone else. Life's really effing weird when you know aliens and psychic stuff exist, and anyone you talk to thinks you are crazy. So I stopped talking about it. I stopped telling people. Try really effing hard to tell myself it was all just a dream, some psychic crap doesn't exist, that I'm crazy. The more I told myself I was crazy and that psychic stuff didn't exist, the more I lost my ability to do things with it. You tell yourself that the thing you saw was a hallucination, that the person who witnessed it was humoring you. You drive yourself crazy, calling yourself crazy. For me to accept that aliens don't exist and I wasn't abducted is to accept that large parts of my life that have been confirmed by non-believers never even happened. I haven't told anyone about it in about 5 years. I'm 31 now. I'm terrified of large open spaces away from people at night, and if I watch movies or things with realistic aliens, it sometimes triggers panic attacks. I thought I had a good handle on things until XCOM came out in 2012. All my friends were playing it, so I jumped on too, thinking the alien thing was behind me. Pretty much non-stop, I was having nightmares and waking up paralyzed and terrified. It happened so often I had to tell my girlfriend the truth and stop playing. She was the last person I ever told. We broke up a few years ago and have no intentions of telling my current girlfriend unless it becomes absolutely necessary. As for how I got the aliens to stop taking me away, one night I built up the courage, meditated for a while, focused hard, very hard, and simply asked them to stop taking me away. That it was disruptive, it was ruining my life, and I haven't seen them since. Story 20. My alien abduction comes from one of my DMT experiences, an extremely powerful psychedelic drug. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. Anyways, I was laying down. I took a big hit and fell back, and my reality disappeared. My consciousness seemed to have been taken to what I describe as a highly advanced operating table. Looking up, 3 or 4 beings made of light appeared out of nothingness and surrounded me. They seemed extremely interested in me, almost excited that I was there. They were bright orange and made of energy. They then pulled out these weird-looking drill devices, like a fancy hand drill. All the pieces of the drill were spinning like crazy. None of this was from this reality. It was a whole different level of physics. Anyways, as they were dancing around me in excitement, they started drilling into my consciousness, ripping out these bright blue bolts of electricity from me, telepathically communicating to me that they were helping me. As they ripped more and more out, I felt this intense euphoria, like a giant weight off my shoulders. They kept saying, "What you're doing, holding on to this. You don't need this. Let us help you." It felt amazing. Eventually, after what seemed like 10 to 20 minutes, everything faded away. They withdrew back into the nothingness in which they came from. Think what you want about DMT, but it's honestly one of the things that keeps me up at night. It's the billion-dollar question. That was one of my last experiences with the drug, but it has radically shifted my view on reality. I felt great for about a few months after the experience, but in the end, life goes back to being life in the third dimension. It's very hard to talk about these sort of things because most people will think I'm nuts, but it happened to me, and I will carry these experiences with me to my grave. I, for the most part, gave up on trying to understand the universe, existence, consciousness, and where DMT fits into the equation. Thought I'd share this quick story with you at all. Peace and love to everyone. We are all in this together. Probably not the answer you would expect in this thread, but it's almost like an alien abduction to me. Story 21. When I was a child, I used to see lights. I lived out in the country on a farm in Washington State, out near Beacon Rock. I remember one night looking out at the pasture from the front porch. I thought I was looking at the full moon, but it kept getting bigger and was moving left to right over the tree line. I turned around to go get my big brother, and when we came back, it was gone. He thought I was messing with him, and he punched me in the arm. The next week, I went out to camp in the woods. We lived on a few hundred acres and were surrounded by woods. I would just walk for about an hour or so with my Walker Coonhound and Australian Shepherd until we found a decent spot. I had a 22 LR with me usually, or a 20 gauge. We had settled on a beautiful clearing by a small creek and set up camp. I remember it starting to get dark and starting a fire. The dog started acting strange and getting loud. My walker starts baying loudly. The next thing I know, I'm in my tent, and it's super early in the morning. The tent is halfway open. The birds haven't even started up yet. The fire's completely out, and my walker is gone. My Australian Shepherd is outside of my tent whining. I had this really bad feeling and knew something wasn't right. I got up and puked next to the tent. I still had all my clothes on, but my boots were on the wrong feet. I took them off to correct it and noticed my socks were wet. I became terrified. This was a new feeling in the woods for me. I was about 11 years old and had been in the woods most of my life. I had never had a feeling like this before. I grabbed my .22 and took off, leaving the tent and everything else I had brought. I sprinted home through the woods and was absolutely relieved when I broke through to the pasture. That dog and I never stopped running. When I got home, my mom was waiting for me and snatched me up. She was crying and said my dad and brothers were out looking for me. She told me Buddy, my walker, had come home around 11 p.m. that night and was baying, and that dog never left my side since I got him as a pup, so they knew something wasn't right. She went out to our old red Suburban and started laying on the horn to signal my dad I had made it home. Cell phones wouldn't become a thing for another 7 to 8 years. I told her what had happened and she kind of shook it off. Nobody really thought anything about it. A few days later, though, I had just gotten out of the shower. I had this weird habit of chewing my toenails. I wouldn't embarrass myself publicly like this if it wasn't important to the story. I was going to town on my right foot and noticed 2 little punctures on my right ankle. It looked almost like a snake bite. It was small and red. I instantly thought about that night in the woods and that missing time. Something else was strange. It matched an identical set on my left foot. Exact same location. They had showed up when I was 5 or 6. My mom had found me outside by the mailbox, sleepwalking one night around 10 p.m. No one is sure how I snuck out of the house, but I will attach some pictures if anyone's interested. This is my story, believe it or not. Story 22. I know this will be buried in the comments, but I hope someone will read this. I remember being abducted at a young age. I remember when my grandpa noticed something bright was outside as he looked out of the kitchen window and went outside, but only to run back in and lock the door, and told my grandma to hide me somewhere as he went to get his handgun in the bedroom. I remember my grandma hiding me in the tub and locking the bathroom door behind as she started to pray. And I remember next was the door being opened and my grandma walking away with someone as I heard footsteps. I slowly got up and noticed everything in the bathroom was dark, and same with the kitchen since we lived on the first floor of an apartment building. I looked out the window from the bathroom and a disc-shaped object giving off a bright light and noticed someone or something standing there and pointing to me. I quickly went numb and remember someone picking me up. I woke up in my bed in the morning, and I wasn't freaking out or nothing, but when the abduction happened, it was 10ish at night, and my grandma was making dinner for Grandpa. When I went into the kitchen, the food was still on the table, and grandparents are in their room, where my grandma is praying hard, and Grandpa was acting weird, like he saw a ghost that night. He picked up a bullet from the floor and told me to get ready for school. A few months later, I was watching TV in the living room with them, and suddenly everything went dark. As the power was gone again, and my grandparents quickly rammed into their room, but couldn't shut the door like it was stone, while I was on the floor, frozen and couldn't move. They were freaking out, and dark figures ran out of the kitchen and into their room and just vanished with my grandparents. I left there as another figure came to me and spoke in some kind of bug-like language, like clicking. I remember the voice changed to English and told me I wasn't ready yet, to be calm. The next thing I knew, I was back watching TV with my grandparents in the living room, which they looked scared but quickly returned to normal, and this happened during the day. When I was older, I remember waking up in a void of whiteness, and I was moving my hips, and then I hear the clicking noise again, and I went back to sleep. From this point on, I learned some things. Woke up one night during my high school years and my lower half of my body went numb, and I tried turning the lights on but power was out, and I saw the figures in my doorway for the first time. I saw it clearly, and yes, they are gray little aliens, but not so little. Every few months this will happen, and I was getting tired of it, so I tried fighting back by finding a way to snap out of the numb feeling, but I'll leave info on that at the end. Skip to, I'm 27, and I was staying over at my cousin's house after I was in an accident and was staying there to recover while watching my cousin's son since she was on a cruise ship. And I remember my body freezing up, heard the voice of my cousin calling out to her son, and the boy got up in confusion and walked out. As I tried screaming to stop him, but that's when I saw the figure again, but just looked at me. And for the first time, it spoke to me within my mind and asked why I keep fighting back. Now this is what I learned after I asked it a ton of questions. They never abducted people during the day in cities unless they are ordered to. They have drones that scout ahead, tiny ships, and smaller ball drones that F with the powers and leaves behind something in the air that makes us calm from being taken, and how we just forget about it like nothing happened. The ball ones also are things that send the aliens and victims to the ship by hovering them and making them phase through objects like the ceiling. They, at the time, are using new ways to stun us because more people are becoming immune to the effects, and it doesn't work altogether. They no longer abduct large groups of families, which I quickly replied with the event of that hillbilly family that was in a one-sided shootout with the aliens, and it said yes because it was dangerous for us and not for them. Handguns or rifles don't hurt them because their skin is very tough where they live. Their bodies had to adapt. They can get hurt from large weapon fire or explosions though. Roswell event did happen because one of their scout ship's engine broke and they crashed, leaving one of the crew members alive. They recovered the member from the army base but not the ship because they weren't smart enough to understand their metal and crap. It's why they use drones after that accident, because they don't want themselves to be recorded in our history like that again. But they know it's pretty much too late because their faces are being sold on shirts and crap. Even worse was when the crop crap happened. They record our wars and our bases and sometimes test our military by appearing to us in the sky or landing somewhere and wait for the Air Force to chase them. The crop circle crap that happened back in the day, that was because of their younger people being idiots and thought it would be funny. They went along with it because they wonder why we started to do the same thing as people started to do, hoaxes of it. They recorded it because it might be important. They changed fuel from the ships because they realize it can kill us, and they reported people gotten sick when they returned. Then the last question it answered, what made me wonder about our own race. The reason why they abducted our race is because we have something that no other races have. Yes, they have visited other races, and it's when we sleep. Somehow our minds can open a window into other dimensions and witness our other selves or random people. They've been trying to figure it out ever since our race was young. They tried mixed mating with us. It's what happened in the White Room. To make hybrids and to test to see if their people can use the power, but there's nothing yet, and the hybrids are the lower class in their social group. After our talk, my cousin's son returned to the room by the drones, and the figure hovered into the air, and before leaving, I asked why it answered all my questions and to not make me lose time. It spoke again and said, it knew me since I was young and always had respect for my willpower and thought I could break the effects. And then it was gone. My cousin's kid started to type on his computer like nothing happened. I don't know what's more effed up, that I effed that thing and it's been the one that takes me away to be tested on because it likes me, or their younger folks did a stupid joke on us, and we all thought the symbols meant something from them, but nope, it was just a prank in the cornfields, and they went along with it because we were doing the stupid symbols in return. Like, just think that when our two races finally meet and someone brings up the crop circle crap, they'll have to admit it was something stupid that their younger people did. LOL. Story 23. My father would tell me this story repeatedly with such a straight look on his face. I never knew if it was a myth, but when I asked my grandmother about it, she remembers it clear as day. My grandmother was just known as Mother back then, having 3 children, one being my future father. They were living out in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, lost in the trees and tranquility. Preparing for a weekend without the kids, her husband, my grandfather, was dropping the kids off with family. When he returned, the house was dark. That creepy dark, where everything feels eerie and you feel alone. They had a fine evening despite his ill-minded thoughts, and they didn't have any problems falling asleep. They didn't have any trouble waking up either, as they were woken up by bright flashes through the tiny solo window in their room. They quickly made their way to the kitchen, where they opened the back door to see what was causing the bright light. My grandfather, wanting to be brave, told his wife to step back. As he opened the back door, more bright colors appeared, an array of colors neatly set in a weird-shaped circle, floating just right above the ground. As his eyes adjusted to the oddly, inhumanly bright colors flashing abruptly, he noticed they were coming from some sort of misshaped aircraft, almost shaped like a football, just a little more round, but still resembling the bare share shape of a deformed football. He couldn't tell what color, nonetheless the material it was made of, due to the bright flashing colors coming from the odd aircraft. It was just small enough to fit in between the patch of trees, but large enough a family could easily fit in. He noticed something walking towards him on 2 legs, 2 feet, just like a human, though it seemed to be in the nude. It didn't seem to have genitalia from what he saw, but everything else was very human-like. The head was elongated, the eyes bulged, but could probably pass for a deformed human. The creature walked up to him and brought his hand out like a wave, but instead of moving back and forth making a wave motion, his hand was still, as if waiting for a high five. Not knowing what to do, my grandfather stood still until he noticed my grandmother had joined him outside and is witnessing this as well. Seeing her face made him realize they weren't dreaming. Once the strange human-like creature put his hand down, another one of their kind appeared, walking out to the same platform his accomplice was standing on, protruding out of the aircraft. He was holding what seemed to be some sort of flat substance. The original creature took it and began offering it to my grandparents. Nervously, my grandfather reached out for it, but the creature retracted and reached out to my grandmother instead. She looked at her husband, weary if she should accept their mystery gift, but finally did. It seemed to be squishy, round like a pancake but larger. The creatures brought out another pancake substance for themselves and began eating it. They looked at my grandparents, waiting for them to eat as well. Without thinking, they each tore a piece off and ate it, realizing it must have been made of some type of wheat or grain, but not one they've seen here on Earth. A different odd grain from where the heck these creatures were from. After they saw my grandparents try their pancake, they have another still wave and retreated into the aircraft. The platform disappeared with them, and the flashing colors started to fade in the sky. I always asked, what did they do with the pancake? Did they give it to the government? Report it at all? Both my dad and grandmother said back then it would have been hard to report something without everyone thinking they were crazy. I never got to meet my grandfather to get his side of the story, but I have this weird gut feeling they weren't telling a myth. Story 24. My junior year in college, I had a strange experience. First, a few details. My dormer was attached to my roommate's, so that I had to go out to hers to get to the bathroom or the hallway. She was a light sleeper, but I wasn't the type to be out so late, so it didn't matter. I had 2 normal operations in my life at that time, and discovered that while under anesthesia, I would wake up briefly toward the end, before I was supposed to. If I get a mosquito bite, I gotta deal with it for at least a month. I'm not a fast healer. One night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I woke up briefly somewhere else and then I went right back to sleep. In this dream, I looked left, I looked right, and then passed back out. Just like if I was in surgery. I was on a hospital gurney, slightly inclined, facing the wall. There was ambient noise behind me, and the echoes suggested it was a very large room. There was nothing sinister about the noises. On either side of me was a row of empty hospital gurneys. At my feet, just to my right, 2 people were having a conversation, sitting on a bench against the wall. One was a person in a dark suit. The other was, I don't know what it was. It was small, and I saw its hands, which appeared to have darker skin, almost grayish. They were speaking together, so animated and excited, like 2 old friends who hadn't seen each other in years, and they didn't notice me wake up. I didn't recognize the dialogue, though I don't speak German, Mandarin, Russian, etc. I recognize them when I hear them, though. This language was wholly unrecognizable, yet the person in the suit was fluent. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I said, "Self, that was a messed up dream," and I went to the shower. As I passed my roommate, who was still in bed, she asked, "Where did you go last night?" I thought that was odd. After my shower, I started to put my makeup on and noticed something on my face. I leaned closer and could not believe what I saw. 2 perfectly parallel lines, impossibly thin, impossibly perfect. There was some clear hard gel on the top, and that's what I felt. There was no blood. My own hair was thicker than the width of the cuts, yet I could see down into my skin a little ways. This was 1996. I had never seen anything like this. These days I would say it was a laser cut topped with liquid Band-Aid, but neither of those things seemed to be prevalent in those days. I said, okay, there's an explanation. I slept on a staple or a paper clip. I do homework in my bed all the time. I went and scoured my pillow for anything sharp. I found nothing. So I got my sewing needle, a staple from some homework, and a paperclip, and I dunked them in hydrogen peroxide and made cuts on my face similar to what was there. Immediately blood welled up and the skin was jagged for all 3 objects, and the width of all the cuts were thicker than the laser cuts. I determined that nothing in my room could have made the cuts. I didn't have an X-Acto knife, but I knew the blood would well up the same way if I did. I skipped my first class as I tried to figure out what to do. I kept obsessively feeling my face all day in awe of the perfection of what was there and how it could have come to be there. There were only 2 people on campus rich enough to have a new digital camera, which meant I would have to borrow a friend's 35mm because I didn't have my own. That meant I would have to explain myself to my friend and possibly the photo shop when the pictures came back. Who would I even give the photos to? Who would I even contact, and what would I tell them? In those days, if you even said the word alien, you were a pariah. After hours of mental debate, sitting on the edge of my bed, I gave up, thinking about it, and I finished my class for the day. I sat on the edge of my bed into the night, debating, unsure of what I should still do. And in the wee hours of the morning, I woke up. The cuts were gone, completely healed, no trace of even a scar. I was disturbed for a few days, but then I eventually forgot about it. A few years after graduating, I decided I was going to have some dental work done, and I went to 2 different offices to get quotes. They both took full facial x-rays. I had long since forgotten my crazy dream and the cuts until I sat down across from the first x-ray technician and pointed to a strange thing showing up above my teeth. I asked if I was looking at a mirror image because it was on the same side as my cuts had been, rather than the opposite side. No, I was told the x-ray was an actual, not a mirror image, so the right side of the image corresponded with the right side of my face. I pointed to the almost square image above my teeth and asked what that was. "It's just an x-ray anomaly." He didn't seem bothered by it. I figured that meant there was some damage or irregularity with the x-ray plates and let it go. Then I went to the second dentist, orthodontist, and had another x-ray done. You guessed it. The square was there in the exact same place. This time, I didn't even try to make polite small talk or beat around the bush. I pointed to the square and said, "What is that?" This time, the tech looked at me funny and said, "It's an x-ray anomaly." Then she leaned closer to me and whispered, "We see them all the time," in a way that gave me goosebumps. This was in Spokane, Washington. I didn't know what else to say, so I didn't. I said nothing. Could it be that whatever negatives or plates or whatever they used for an x-ray were damaged in exactly the same spot in exactly the same shape? Maybe, I guess. I don't know much about x-rays. After that, I reflected on my situation. I don't feel freaked out, but I think there might be something in my face put there by somebody else. Here's what I know. We do this all the time to other species. We chase them in helicopters, shoot at them with tranquilizer darts, take rectal temperature, take blood samples, stamp radio tags in their ears with no regard to if it hurts or if the trauma of the event or if their furry buddies will ostracize them later because they have something funky on their ear. In my situation, I was clearly well cared for, if it really happened at all. Someone was there as some kind of representative on my behalf. I was handled in such a way that if I didn't have a weird metabolism, I wouldn't have known what even happened. I never once felt pain. My cut healed instantly. If this is some kind of research-driven radio tag for the purposes of data collection, preservation of habitat or species like we would do, they did it with far more regard for me than we have for other species on our own planet. I don't know what might happen if I get another x-ray 20 years later. I have tried to look when I go through airport security if anything shows up on the image we see in the booth, but I don't see anything. Strangely, I'm okay with this. I think it might just be science, nothing nefarious or evil. I wish my consent had been asked first, but I suppose it's hard to ask for consent when you're not even supposed to exist. Story 25. No one will believe this, but it is true, and I've spent 2 years in a mental health institution for it. Back in '89, my sister was dating a creep that was almost 10 years her senior. She was 17, a real a-hole standing 6'2", and he was on the same football team when he was in high school, then worked in a legal field, as my father back in the day. That would bring gifts to my parents and act all nice, but then beat me any chance he could get for reasons unknown. I was a quiet kid who loved reading comics and dinosaurs. It's autumn, and he drove us 3 out to Palomar Observatory, illegally, and it was amazing. As my sister and him make out in the truck listening to Meatloaf, I'm on the truck bed with my binoculars, looking at the range and stars and whatnot when suddenly the music sound level increased to massive levels. But instead of music, it was the sound of white noise and a loud crack. Then everywhere was darkness. My sister was screaming. The white noise continued and I peed my pants and sat as still as the statue of David. The stars were gone. The moon was gone. The range was nowhere to be seen, just absolute darkness. Then I woke up, or so I thought, as I caught myself picking up my binoculars at home and having my sister tell me to hurry up. Before I knew what I was doing, I realized we were on the way to the observatory. Somehow, had I gone back in time? I don't know, but I pleaded with them to go home. Obviously, the lovely boyfriend told me to shut the F up, and it happened again. The noise, the crack, the darkness, and again I was at home, getting my binoculars. This happened 8 times, exactly the same. Every time I sat still, every time I peed my pants and cried. The last time, I was found at the roadside with scratches all over my body, the boyfriend dead at the observatory, and my sister missing. I told everyone everything. I was 7 years old, and from 93 to 95, I was living in a mental institution out in Massachusetts, away from everyone I knew, and where the staff laughed at me, how I was a Terminator sent from the future to tell lies. In the winter of 95, my father made it so I could go home and return to school, but I still never saw my sister ever again. Story 26. Okay, so this happened to me last year, and I'm still not very sure what happened that night. Everything is fuzzy. I still question myself to this day and still try to rationalize what it could have possibly been. I told my roommates, but they all dismissed my experience, stating that I was dreaming, misremembering, in a paranoid state, hallucinating, etc. And I've only told this story a handful of other times and haven't told it since because I was shot down and not taken seriously and teased a lot. I would like to mention I am a very skeptical person, very logical, rational-minded. If there isn't hard evidence or a seemingly rational explanation, theory, if at 99.99999% doesn't exist, I never believed in conspiracy theories, demons, spirits, God, you name it. Anything that seemed to define natural order, I immediately dismissed. Disclaimer, I do believe in aliens, in the sense that I am almost certain there is other life out there in the unfathomably large universe, although I do not believe that they've ever visited Earth. I would say I am pretty laid back, a chill dude. I've never had a really active imagination, and I haven't dreamed in so many years. Some background information. This event happened a little over a year ago. I was 21, a junior in college at the time studying biotechnology, now a senior in a medium-large school with a somewhat large city of 150,000 people and another 650,000 people in the surrounding metropolitan area. Over my college career, I have come to figure out that I do my best work right when I wake up in the morning, when I'm fresh, because I'm too worn out by the end of the day after classes and just have zero motivation or concentration to do any work. So just like I did today. Final seasons, baby. Currently procrastinating on Reddit. I woke up at 2 a.m. to study. I probably did this 2 times a week. Popped a Vyvanse, ADHD medication for those unaware, basically a prodrug that converts it to amphetamine once it gets metabolized in the body. I will return to this later. I am diagnosed with mild ADHD, mostly attentive and not so much hyperactivity, so the Vyvanse helps a ton, although I haven't been prescribed in over a year as my parents are pretty anti-drug, so I have resorted to buying off of friends. When I take the drug, I go into an almost drone-like state. I get so invested into my school, I work 6 hours and it can fly by and it'll feel like 45 minutes. So I was studying for a bioengineering test, which was a few days away, and I was buzzing along, going over my notes, redoing homeworks, problems, sets, all of it. As mentioned earlier, this was very early in the morning. All of a sudden, I got up to use the bathroom, and when I returned to my room, I saw the window on the door to my elevated second-story balcony leading outside into our backyard was strangely illuminated in a bright bluish-white tinted light, bright enough that I noticed the glow through closed blinds in a completely illuminated room. There was also a strange noise. Still, have not been able to pinpoint it to this day. This was extremely odd because the sun wasn't supposed to come up for another hour or two. It was 3:45 a.m. I assumed it was one of my roommates out on the balcony who turned the balcony light on to smoke or something. So I went out to say what's up and shoot the crap for a little bit. I then go out onto the balcony, but to my surprise, there's no one out there. And then boom, a white light flashed so bright it caused me to recoil. I do not remember anything after this. I don't know what happened between then and when I seemed to come to many hours later at like 10:30 a.m. I was sitting at my desk doing work when I came to, and immediately was so confused. I was disoriented, slightly nauseous, although the nausea could be from the medication, and couldn't remember a thing. I experienced a total loss of time with almost zero recollection of any of it. I immediately panicked because I realized I missed my 9:30, which I never do, so I took a lightning quick shower and sped walk off to class. While I was in class, I was trying to figure out what had happened. The more I tried to piece everything together, the more confused I became. All the work and studying I didn't retain any of it after I went to check on the balcony. This was evident by all of the completed work, This has never happened before. When I'm on my medication, I remember almost everything, so I was just getting more confused about the whole situation. I decided to investigate further and checked my search history. There was an approximately hour-long gap in my search history at the approximate time I believed I went to the bathroom, because I remember getting a text maybe 15 minutes before the bathroom break. This started freaking me out and annoying me while I was in class. I gave up paying attention and tried as hard as I could to research and figure out what had happened. I asked many of my friends, some were awake at that hour, if they experienced anything peculiar or saw any strange lights, heard weird noises, but none of them did. I ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning, as we have a working detector in our apartment. I don't think it was a dream because I haven't dreamed in years, and I was actually awake as shown by my search history, completed work, and sporadic texts throughout the night. I don't think I was in a sleep-deprived state as I went to bed at 7:30 p.m. the night before, as I always do, 6.5 hours, and I regularly get 7. I don't think I was in a amphetamine-induced delirious state as I've been taking this medicine for a while, am used to the effects, have very good nutrition, and always take my vitamins and supplements. I've never experienced sleep paralysis or night terrors, and I was 100% awake, so I do not think this is the case. I'm not hypoglycemic or diabetic or anything either. To this day, I still have no clue what happened, and it scares me. I really believe there is a natural explanation for what I experienced, but I seem to rule out most of the natural explanations and theories I have come across during my research. This experience still gives me chills and has been figuratively eating me away at my sanity. It kind of haunts me, and it would give me much better peace of mind if I could figure out what actually happened that night. Everyone I have talked to has dismissed this experience, so I don't like telling it anymore because people just think I am lying or full of crap. I would feel the same way, to be honest. If you have any ideas what happened, I would love to hear them. Story 27. As I grow older, I begin to become more and more skeptic, especially as we understand more and more how the human brain works regarding memory and experience. I am also surprisingly reluctant to publicly share this story, which is a strange for me, as I am a very open person. I would say to a fault I speak my mind regarding issues. For some of my formative years, as long as I can remember to roughly 12 or 14, I was absolutely terrified of the dark. This subsided somewhat as I became a teenager, but persisted in some capacity until at least early adulthood. And having my door closed at night, to this day I am somewhat uncomfortable with both, but can deal with it as I'm an adult now and adults can't be afraid of the dark, lol. My parents were, and one still is, my father was until his death 12 years ago, a very spiritual pair into New Age therapies, holistic medicine, and the occult. My mom currently is a practicing spiritual medium and counselor. From as long as I could remember, they have always actively encouraged my spiritual growth and development, and have been open to any personal experience which I had or claimed to have had. I had issues with the dark and bad dreams as a child, but in retrospect, this was probably totally normal for a child of 5 or 7. Of course, at the time, stories and memories about monsters that disappear into the shadows, or shadows which seem to grow over the room, slowly engulfing it in a growing darkness, didn't seem perfectly normal. My father, for reasons which may become clear later on, decided to read Intruders. I thought it was called Invaders, but changed it after browsing the wiki by Bud Hopkins, to me at around age 4 or 5. This made the psychological issues around it infinitely worse. I remember waking up many times with feelings that would be comparable to sleep paralysis as a child, obviously not having any idea of what this was or why it was happening. Now that I am older, I can appreciate that the level of terror I experienced during these night terrors, while not strange for some children, was certainly not the norm. I would regularly have dreams about being taken from my room and being experimented on, especially as a child of 7 or 8. This again too was strange, but not unheard of. One specific example that I can think of, and I know this occurred regularly before the age of 7, was that I was convinced there as a group of women who lived under my bed, whom I called the lipstick ladies, who would climb out at night and perform fellatio on me. Again, not a totally strange experience for a developing child, but a little weird when taken at its completely, especially for a child of 5 or 6 years old. The reason I know the time frame so accurately is because when I was 7, my family moved to Uganda. I made friends there and all was good, until one community movie night a friend's parents took me and him to see Fire in the Sky, and I was absolutely inconsolable. I remember being paralytically terrified to the point of hiding underneath my folding chair. My friend's parents brought me home and explained what had happened. In retrospect, I can tell that they thought this was weird, but not completely abnormal for a child. When my parents asked me, I had to sleep in their bed that night, why the movie scared me so much, I told them it was because it wasn't imagination like the other movies. This one was real, and real made it scary. At this point in my life, I had seen many other scary movies, as honestly there isn't much else to do in Uganda. I was perhaps 8, maybe 9. Another semi-normal thing for children, I'm sure, but that occurred regularly during sleepovers, and especially during the night, was Doctor, in which me and my male friends would be a little bit intimate with each other, in which I would claim I was trying to understand them. I do not believe I was essayed as a child, and to be honest, the thought never even occurred to me until just now. And I am not homosexual. Anyways, eventually the night terrors passed, and we moved back to Canada and life went on, until I had another experience. At perhaps 14 or 15, I was suddenly woken up in the middle of the night. I did not rouse and I did not come to. I was immediately fully awake and pumped full of adrenaline. Directly beside my bed, in this part I can remember vividly, were 2 lighter spots standing directly beside my bed over me. This part is hard to describe. If you can imagine a shadow standing up, not reflecting on anything in the middle of a dark room, and then kind of imagine the opposite, like a distortion in the light, I guess you could call it. It's not nothing because there is something there, but it looks like nothingness. Like not air, not the stuff behind it, but nothingness. This video about carbon nanotubes is the closest I can use to describe it. I then immediately remembered, and this all took place over a fraction of a second of course, that this was not the first time this had occurred, and I did not like what was about to happen next. When I became aware of the beings beside my bed, I immediately filled with terror, as I said, was 100% cognitively aware of my surroundings within a fraction of a second. I scrambled backwards across my bed, towards the wall to get away from them, and tried to scream, but no noise came out of my mouth. For this whole 2 or 3 second episode, I was scrambling around my bed, trying to get away from them. Within moments of this happenings, one of the beings said something to the other. I said said because, like in all the movie tropes, the sounds just appeared in my head. What's going on? He's not supposed to be awake. And they floated to the corner of my room and slowly faded into a darker shadow that slowly grew to engulf the corner of the room, then disappear. My heart was blowing out of my chest. I was absolutely gut-wrenchingly terrified. This was not normal. There was someone in my room in the middle of the night and they just disappeared. The whole episode took maybe 5 or 6 seconds. And when it was all over, I said, probably nothing, and went back to bed. Yes, that's correct, as a 14-year-old boy who just tried to scream at the top of my lungs, was scrambling over the top of myself all over my bed after being suddenly woken up by 2 beings in my room, pumped full of adrenaline, decided the best course of action was to roll over and go back to sleep. I assume the whole ordeal was 10 to 15 seconds long, as I don't have a recollection of anything other than what I just shared. I do want to emphasize that I do remember quite vividly my heart pounding as I was scrambling in my bed moving around, and was unlike any other sleep paralysis experience, of which I have had many that I've ever had. This is a perfectly recollection to this day. I can see my room and the shadows moving around it. In the morning, I shared this experience with my parents and how strange it was that I just rolled over and went back to bed, and they in turn shared something with me. Now, as I said earlier, as a younger child, 10 and under, I was terrified of the dark and being taken at night, but by the age of 14 or 15 had mostly outgrown this fear. My parents assumed I had outgrown it as well, and there hadn't been any talk of anything like this for several years in the house, so they'd put it out of their mind. When I shared the story about the visitors, the next morning they shared a story with me. As I said earlier, my dad elected to read me an apparent work of nonfiction from ufologists from a very young age, under 5 years old. As an adult now, I can appreciate how strange this was. My father and mother told me the reason for this abnormal parental behavior was because at around the age of 3, completely unprompted and without any frame of reference, told them a story. I told them that I was being visited at night by the monkey men who came and took me through the window at night. They asked who the monkey men were, and I told them they were the people who took me away to Kings Park, a larger local park, at night where we would go into their spaceship and fly around and heal people. I do not remember telling them the stories, but this did jar another memory for me. And again then and now I can remember it vividly. I can remember being in my bed as a child, turning to the window. At my window I know I can see two beings, but in my mind I can't see them. I can see the sky and stars in parts of the window, but in the bottom right and left corners there is a scene missing. I don't know how to describe it other than part of my memory has been photoshopped away. Like the video, it's just a weird, darker part of the memory. In my memory, I am aware that I can see one of the beings, the one on the right, waving at me, although in my recollection, I cannot see them waving. It's very strange, and I honestly cannot think of any other memories that I have that share this same pop that these memories do. I believe everything I have said to be true, a true recollection of these events. With that said, even though I believe I do remember them, the rational, reasonable part of my adult brain says it is not true. I haven't had anything else I would describe as strange since that I can think of. I have never experienced missing time to the best of my knowledge. I don't believe I have any strange markings on my body. This is not a throwaway account and will honestly do my best to answer whatever questions anyone might have indefinitely. My name is Kangaroo, and I believe I may have been abducted. Story 28. My grandfather has a story that goes like this. Back in the 80s, he and his brother Jonah were setting up to go fishing out in the boondocks. It was early morning, about 6:30 or so, and they were draining their coffee thermos in the bank of the pond. It was a new fishing spot for them to explore. At the time, they were living in East Texas, with humid breezes and mosquito bites that boiled in the heat. The sun was just beginning to break over the stretch of the trees as they pushed their rowboat into the water. My grandfather, we call him James, turned to Jonah to remark on the brilliant yellow of the sunrise. It was blinding, he said. When he tells this story to us, he cannot stress this point enough. The sky was barely pink from the dawn. The sun itself was shining like the quarter of an eclipse. Jonah looked up, noticing the anomaly mere seconds before. James shielded his eyes and fumbled for the sunglasses clipped around his shirt collar. He started to tell Jonah that they should leave, that he had a bad feeling about being there. When the wind began to wail and the dirt picked up around them, Jonah shouted to James, the words lost in the disturbed darkness. My grandfather tells us it was about this time he reckoned they should get going. He and Jonah abandoned their poles and boat and scrambled to their truck. He figured they would be back for them later. In the midst of all the ruckus, Jonah ran that poor Chevy CK over a tree trunk, steering them into a tree and a little off the trail. The truck was totaled. At the hospital, when the nurse asks how fast they were going, Jonah offered 35, maybe 40. He had been pinned between the seat and steering wheel, sustaining a few bruised ribs, but otherwise relatively unharmed. James had gone through the windshield. Victims of head-on collisions usually suffer crush injuries and severe internal trauma, including but not limited to lower body fractures, traumatic brain injuries, flailed chest, abdominal and upper body impact injuries. Even at low speeds, James's accident should have been fatal. However, my grandfather arrived at the hospital with minor cuts and bruises. He had a concussion the doctors wanted to keep an eye out, but other than that, both brothers were fine. Neither were able to say how long they were unconscious, waiting for help to arrive, because neither remember anything after the accident or the next few days. They were, in short, miracles, survivors of the impossible, or at least highly unlikely. My grandmother said the most alarming thing she experienced when visiting my grandfather in the hospital was his sudden ability to speak other languages. She said as she sat by his bedside table, he would switch tongues in the midst of their conversation, then not remember a thing he had said. My sweet Nana accused Jonah and him of drinking. The doctors assured her that amnesia and a little confusion was common in trauma victims, especially ones that were unable to mentally process the events that had transpired. The accident had shaken their brains. That's all, a nurse told her. Nan insisted, though, you have to understand. My grandfather is pure-blooded American redneck, a high school dropout. While he means well, he couldn't remember a lick of any foreign language while he was in school, let alone during his recovery. Nan investigated for herself. She cornered Jonah in his rest bed. He wasn't any help. He had been unable to sleep, replaying the moment of the crash over and over again in his head until the memory stressed his conscious. and he was admitted for psychiatric observation. Nan maintains to this day wasn't the sight of her husband stumbling over his sentences, bleeding from the stitches on his forehead. No, instead the memory that haunts her is Jonah bolting upright every time he closed his eyes, screaming that it was too bright to see. My grandfather and Jonah don't like to talk about what happened that day. They will talk about the pond, the sight of what they liked to believe was a UFO, and the terror of realizing they were about to crash in the middle of the woods where no one was likely to find them. They won't talk about the experience that came after, how they were found, or what happened in between the moment of impact and their release from the hospital. What my grandfather will say, if prompted, is that he holds one proud scar from that crash. He'll point to it in the folds in his forehead that collapse around the raised skin, and he'll tell you, that's where they probed me. Story 29. Competition camp when I was 14 with scouts. It was the last night and we had PL's prowl. Basically, as a patrol leader, you got the privilege of sitting up around the fire as long as you want. Me and the other PLs had brought heaps of junk food and we were looking forward to gorging ourselves on all the treats. Sit down around the fire and then I don't remember anything except for some weird flashes of being in complete darkness. When I came to, I was having some weird convulsions or something on all fours in a different patrol's tent. These were big 14 by 14 tents, and a few of the scouts who were awake were calling out to me. I asked what happened, and I had apparently walked in and stood there for 15 to 45 minutes. I can't remember what they said, and one of them had woken up when I walked in and was calling out my name as I stood there blankly. Then suddenly I collapsed to all fours and started convulsing, which is when I came to. This was around 3:30 a.m. I groggily went to my patrol's tent, got into my sleeping bag, and went to sleep. In the morning, I noticed that I had a perfectly circular scab on my kneecap that looked like it had been there for a day or two already. I spoke to the other patrol leaders. One of them had just said he was tired and went straight off to bed. The other two had sat around the fire for 10 minutes or so, chatting with me, and then they decided they were tired and headed off to sleep. I said I'd be going myself soon. That was apparently around 11. What happened between 11 and 3:30 a.m., I have no real recollection of. I have weird flashbacks of being in the middle of the bush with a bright light or looking at the moon. But considering how many decades ago this was, it could easily be an invented memory, especially from the times I've told this as my alien abduction story. The weird thing was the scab on my kneecap took a long time to fully heal up, and when it had, it was a perfectly circular scar, and you could feel damage underneath, like it had a hole cut through it and then healed up. Years later, I went and had my leg x-rayed for completely different reasons. They commented on the fact my kneecap looked like it had been punctured, then healed up, which was odd. The scar is still there, but unfortunately it's no longer perfectly circular due to a second, what I can only assume is completely unrelated, incident involving a tuk-tuk rolling over in a storm in Cambodia. Story 30. I wasn't abducted from what I remember, but I used to have a crippling fear of an alien invasion. When I was a kid, used to watch the skies from my window like a hawk each night, looking for the smallest strange thing to pop up. I always had an interest in the night sky ever since I was 4 or 5, walking home with my aunt one night when we saw a large, misshapen white sphere in the sky. It was like the moon, but smaller, more bright and lumpy, and the actual moon was just a few feet away from it. I was really young, and even with my generally vivid memory, it was still blurry. But this sticks out in my mind because I remember my aunt commenting on how weird it was and rushing us home. But also later in life, early high school, I was walking home from a friend's house and looked up to marvel at the stars when I saw this large blue orb among the smaller white specks. I remember my first thought was, oh my gosh, it's finally happening. I'm finally seeing something effed up in the sky. But right as I was finishing the thought, the orb blew up in a cosmic explosion of blue and green, in a way I can only describe as something you'd see on Star Trek. I immediately started running home, and I was a chubby teen, so I did not run for nothing. I burst into my front door absolutely bawling my eyes out, screaming about the alien invasion I've always feared was finally among us. I never heard anything about it after that night. Nothing on the news, and no one in my area ever mentions seeing it when I bring it up. Then last year, I went camping out in the Crown Lands of Muskoka, and if you've ever been in a place with very little light pollution, you know how stunning the sky can be. I was down by the water, probably just after midnight, and was gazing up at the stars when I saw one speedy little white light moving straight across the sky. The place I was camping in wasn't a stranger to planes flying overhead, so I wasn't immediately taken aback, although I was wondering why there was no noise and no other lights like the other planes had. Not to mention it was going rather fast and seemed much higher than a plane would be. I was with my friend at the time and jokingly raised my flashlight to the sky and turned it on and off, signaling whatever was up there. The second I did this, the light took an incredibly sharp right turn and began coming back the way it came. I stress every time I tell this story that this sharp turn was faster than any plane or helicopter could possibly accomplish. I slammed my flashlight at my side upon this sight and demanded my friend and I go back to our tent. She agreed, having also seen what I'd seen and been unnerved. Funnily enough, about a month later, I was watching alien videos on YouTube and came across a Canadian politician who stepped down and began focusing on UFOs after he experienced exactly what I experienced in the same place, Muskoka. I still get nervous when I look up at the night sky nowadays. Story 31. Alright, here it goes. I've only told a few people this. Got ridicule from some family members I respect, so I kind of shut up about this for many years. I was around 5 years old, probably 1962-ish. The bedroom window, a bedroom I shared with two brothers, faced a circle-shaped park in front of our house. There was a one-way street around the park. We could always tell if an ambulance, police car, rescue squad, or fire truck was coming by the sound and type of lights the vehicle had. The perimeter of this park was lined with palm trees. Later in my childhood, the neighborhood kids and I would play many a baseball and football game there. We'd mess with the bats that lived in the palms. A million stories about the fun we all had there. A great place to grow up. Linwood, California. Literally an all-American city. At least that's what the welcome sign said. One night I saw some lights I couldn't identify. The following is what I consciously remember. I walked out on the porch to see what it was. I feel as though I was drawn to this. A short distance above the palm trees I saw a circle, metallic craft. It had windows along the front. I could clearly see several men and women manning the craft. They all looked very handsome. They looked like white humans, all dressed in blue. Years later, I came to the conclusion they were what's known as Nordics. They were smiling at me in a very friendly and welcoming way. The craft was mostly silent, maybe a very low hum, red and blue lights emitting from the lower part. The area the people were sitting, a few standing, was well lit. Although I was on my front porch, I felt they wanted me to come closer. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bedroom bunk bed with the taste of strawberry ice cream in my mouth and a mild soreness in my groin. Upon feeling my scrotum, I only had one testicle. I had two when I went to bed earlier that night. I swear on everything I hold dearly, this is true, and this event happened to me. Story 32. Intro. Back in January of 2018, I was back at my parents' home while they were out of my town. It was nice to relax in a big house by myself, so that night I planned on relaxing in the hot tub outside. Not sure if many of you are familiar with pool equipment, but my system can be controlled by this wireless handheld controller. Press a button and the jets come on, the fountains, etc. The remote usually sits outside by the pool so it doesn't disconnect. I kept going back and forth from the house to the remote, checking on the temperature. It was taking a longer time than usual to heat up because of the cold weather. Story. So this is the part where I started to notice something I have never felt before in my life. Going back and forth from inside to outside, I noticed that every time I went outside, I got this very eerie feeling. The feeling you get when you hear a noise late at night by yourself. The feeling you get walking down a dark street and sense someone behind you. The feeling you get when you're terrified. I would turn my head and listen because usually when I get that gut feeling that something isn't right, something is not effing right. It sent chills down my spine so much I could feel the hair on top of my head stand up like a buzz cut. I blew this off because maybe I was just overreacting and thinking too much of it. I've always been spiritual in nature, but never really searched for the answers. I've always felt how low energy is a constant and doesn't die. I felt this weird energy around me, so to speak, that I have never felt before, and it scared me. So I proceeded to move on with my night. The hot tub was finally done heating and my butt was cold. I grabbed a bottle of water and a cigarette, along with my towel and the remote. I sat these items next to me on the chair next to the hot tub. Once I got in, I sparked my Joe and looked up into the sky. It was a clear, cold, crisp night. I heard police sirens in the distance and thought to myself, what a world we live in. The next thing I remember is the noise. I was just about done with my cig when I felt this pulsing, humming noise all over my body. It was like bass from a song but more metallic in nature. It was thumping, but humming, and you could feel it in your bones. I looked around frantically to see where it was coming from, but it felt like it was everywhere. Once again, I felt that utter fear and chill down my spine, and my eyes locked onto what I believe was an otherworldly being. About 100 yards away, maybe 100 yards in the air across the lake on the tree line, was a dull shroud of light. Slightly orange, but it seemed to have every color. It wasn't really a color I've seen, more of just light itself. I became frozen in place and could not move or make a sound. My vision immediately started to tunnel, and all I could see was this craft hovering above the trees, just chilling there. To describe what it looked like, I would say if you looked at a light from a distance and take the source of that light away, but keep the light around it, is what it looked like. Just a shroud of light with no source. I noticed my awareness of things around me was heightened, like I was in a higher state of consciousness. I remember saying, "It's within the light," while staring at whatever it was. I have never said that before in my life. It just popped into my head and I said it aloud. After that, I broke out of the tunnel vision and started thinking, this is not real. I'm seeing things. All that kind of crap. I couldn't believe it. I turned around to face opposite side of where this thing was and turned back around, and it was still there. The next thing I remember is a gust of wind, which somehow opened and then closed the iron gates I have on each side of my house at the exact same time. It rattled the whole fence along my backyard. I was so scared, but I could not move. I'm not entirely sure what happened next because it's all in fragments, but after the gates I remember kind of waking back up, like coming out of it still in the hot tub. But as soon as that happened, the hot tub started draining water like gallons a second, and the remote was on the chair next to me. At this point, I was done. I ran inside as fast as I could. I was shaking like I had just seen a murder. I get back inside and I grabbed my phone. I could barely hold it still, but I looked at the clock, and I had lost roughly 45 minutes of time when I had been in the hot tub for 5 minutes when the event started. It all happened so fast that I didn't know what really happened until I sat down and said, "What the F?" I'm not sure what I witnessed that night, but I will say whatever it was had an effect on my perception of time and consciousness. I could feel things I have never felt and saw things I have never seen. I hope one day we figure out what we should know about this world, because after this experience, I will say that this world is not just us on a physical plane. There is more to this universe as a whole than we think. I know this post is extremely long, but I couldn't leave any details out. This is how I experienced it, so this is what I wanted you all to do the same. Thank you for listening. Story 33. Hello, alien abductee here. I even have results of a past polygraph test. I had taken this polygraph because I thought my then fiance should know what she would be getting into. I know saying you're an abductee sounds crazy. It is something I don't talk about because of the eye roll factor. So it was terribly nerve-wracking to admit this secret part of my life with her. Will she think I am nuts, crazy, delusional? Will she still marry me? Which she did. She was owed the truth because I had a feeling she would be taken too, as an ex-girlfriend of mine had been abducted when we started living together. I had lived with an ex that started to have these unsettling dreams that were real. She was awake in her bed. She felt she was not dreaming, but when she saw this being at the foot of her bed glowing, she didn't know what to make of it. Even when she was describing her experiences, I knew what had happened, but I still kept quiet. Like I said, talking about this is not easy because of how crazy it sounds. Later, I opened up about my experiences. I could tell she still didn't know what to make of it. Then one night, we were both taken. Having these experiences happen to you when you are alone is one thing, but to have someone else see and experience what you have, well, that is hard to ignore anymore. Though she didn't think they were aliens, her take was that they were demons or angels. She had came from a religious background, and that is how she categorized these experiences, as seeing demons and angels. Even after remembering going up into the spacecraft, "Darling, I doubt angels need spaceships to fly." She had not only been the only witness. A few years back, I found out my sibling had the same experience. I always thought she might have. For some reason, the ETs like to keep the abductions in the same bloodline. When it had come out, I recall my mom's mouth dropped in shock. My sibling had told my mom in confidentiality, but as my mom said, she didn't know what to make of it. However, when I came out, she said she knew something happened because it came from my mouth. My sibling and I recall seeing the grays, those big black eyes. The eyes are always striking. We recalled the same instances during childhood. For example, she heard them in the hallway the night before, and in the morning she came to check on me. I remember being ultra embarrassed because I was naked. Apparently, the ETs forget to put my underwear back on. The ETs made small mistakes like that, forgetting to put your underwear back on, or placing you in the bed the opposite way, or placing you on the couch sometimes, all of which happened to me. As for my wife, she had her first experience a couple of years after we married. She recalled seeing a bright light shining through the bedroom door. A little dot red light she could not identify was just inside, right of the bedroom door, and a lizard-looking creature to the right of the bed. She remembers being paralyzed, floated out of her bed, then it goes blank from there. As for more of my experiences, read through my comment histories. Being abducted is terrifying. I wish this had never happened to me. I wish I had the luxury to think those that they claim they were are crazy. I don't know why they are here. I don't know what they plan to do, but I have a feeling it's in their interest and not ours. Story 34. Maybe 5 years ago, I was staying at my parents' house with my little sister while they were out of town. She was mid-teens at the time, and I was early 20s. We are both very interested in the paranormal and have had numerous discussions of what else could be out there. This particular night, we were sitting in the dark in the living room. I had turned all the lights off and we were watching the lightning bugs outside the large windows, just casually talking. Out of nowhere, there was an unbelievably huge burst of orange light that seemed to come from outside. It lit up the entire downstairs as if I had turned the lights on. I'm talking nuclear explosion bright. My immediate response was thinking that our house or the neighbor's house that we were facing had caught on fire. We both ran out the side door and that was it. We both have zero memory of what was outside, how long we were outside, or what we did after coming back in. We simply woke up the next morning in our beds. And oddly, it took us both a few days to even remember that anything had happened. It wasn't too long after this that my sister started having a memory or a vision of us walking out the side door, like we did that night, and of a large green orb at our eye level in the middle of the driveway. That was it. That's all that ever came from it. But it still bothers me to this day. We both found it especially odd because we did have such a fascination with the idea of other life, that if something had happened to us, we would be discussing it, all of us. We also don't understand how we could have seen that amount of light in the living room, gone outside, then just casually came back inside, with no explanation for what had happened, only to not remember any of it until days later. If we were both sound of mind, it just simply wouldn't have happened like that. About a year after this happened, I decided to read the book Communion for the first time and came across one of the author's first experiences of being abducted. He recalled waking up to a huge orange glow coming through every window and being absolutely positive the house was on fire. I put down the book at that point and still haven't finished it because of the extreme unease it gave me recalling my exact reaction. Story 35. One time I woke up lying in my bed around 3 a.m. and I saw what would be stereotypically described as gray aliens. I watched 2 of them float through my bedroom window and leave. I was conscious and I knew without a doubt that I was awake. I wasn't startled. I was unfazed because I felt deep down that I knew them somehow, though it was the first time I had ever seen before, consciously at least. I had never had sleep paralysis at this point in my life. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I was awake, aware, calm, and I could move. About 4 years after this event, I started having sleep paralysis very frequently, from demons to intruders, simply loud noises, and sometimes aliens, of course. I was aware that I was experiencing sleep paralysis each and every time, about 20-ish in total. I couldn't move, and the more I struggled to, the more I feared. The events I saw were vivid, though I knew they weren't real at all, except the very first time. That was the effing scariest, and I didn't know what was going on. Saw a ghost walking around in a hotel room. Tried screaming at my friend, but couldn't open my mouth. I just watched the ghost move around. It's almost always scary as crap. I am very familiar with sleep paralysis, unfortunately, and I can say with absolute certainty the alien experiences wasn't sleep paralysis. I don't really mind if people believe this or not. It's not that interesting of a story anyways, but it's real. I lived at the edge of suburbs, near a lot of farmland. I've had some weird experiences with lights outside, but nothing with any real answers. Just very, very odd situations. One example, seen a light flash in the sky over a barn, with a lot of livestock mind you. It flashed about 10 or so times very quickly. Then 3 seconds later it flashed again 5 quick times, but farther off in the distance. There are telephone poles in this area, but nothing could have caused that light, as the telephone poles weren't in that spot nor that high, just nearest electricity. The barn, of course, had lights for the animals, but none even higher than 10 feet. I was driving by about 9 p.m. at night as I saw it, and the barn is about 50 feet from the road. The lights were about 100 feet high. Rough estimates, of course, but you get the idea. Anyways, aliens, man. Story 36. Missing time, unexplained travel. Alright, so I have two compelling, very believable experiences with this. The first case involves a very real experience in my bedroom, where from what I saw and remember, aliens came into my room. Another is missing time that is 100% proven, so this time I will tell the missing time. At the time I was going to a state school, 2 hours from my house. My roommate lived right in between my house and the school, and often she was nice enough to drive me home. On this particular night, she wanted to stop at her place first and switch cars, so not to put too much mileage on it. As we were leaving her house, we stopped at 2 coffee shops, the second one because our order was wrong. Now we had both receipts together. One said 9:43 p.m. and 9:54. From the 9:54 coffee shop, it was a 4-minute drive to get on the highway. We make it, and she's in no rush because we were having a really deep conversation. So I'd say we stayed in the slow lane. Now for context, and maybe this doesn't matter, but she was driving a minivan with open space in the back, except for a pallet of items. And the topic of conversation? Betty and Barney Hill. I knew more about it, so I was telling that story. We talked, and I mean talked and talked for what seemed like hours. We talked about paranormal things, alien theories, ghost stories, but mostly we stayed on the topic of aliens. I was finishing up a sentence, sort of slowly, like I didn't remember what I was going to say next, and it was so silent, like I almost didn't remember where I was. I looked at my friend, and she was looking at me, sort of confused, and she looked back at the road. I chuckled a fake laugh just to clear the air, and we both cut each other off. Next exit, my town. The clock on the van read 10:10. I looked at her in disbelief. The drive we took, on a good day, speeding takes at least 45 minutes to get where we are. I picked up the receipt and checked 9:54. I checked my phone, 10:11. She is a spooked easy type of person, where I'm more of a calmer person in a situation like this. We managed to drive a 60-minute drive and make it in my driveway in 15 minutes. 9:54 coffee, 10 on the highway, 10:15 in my driveway. As I'm collecting my things for the weekend, we both began to ask each other what just happened. I tried to calm her down, as she had to drive back alone and sent her on her way. She called me about an hour and 15 minutes later. She had just gotten home. She went the same speed that we were traveling out here. Story 38. My experience occurred in the summer of 2009. The whole evening has stuck with me very well over the years. I was hanging out with 4 other people at my best friend's apartment. We had just finished spending the afternoon and evening on the lake, and were just hanging out and listening to music. I remembered it was around 10 p.m., and my best friend had just bought the game Splosion Man for 360, and he was showing us what the game actually was. All of a sudden, I had the strongest urge to need to go outside. It is hard to explain how strong and gripping this sense was. So without saying anything, I just got up and went out the front door and walked down into the parking lot. I don't recall ever seeing anything that stood out as strange, but the next thing I know, I have this overwhelming sensation that I am falling. Within this feeling of falling, I'm also experiencing what could be described as having a sensory overload maybe. I can't really explain what the actual experience was, but the best way to describe it is that I was learning about the nature of the universe and the significance of the soul. Basically, I was being taken on some kind of intergalactic voyage, but was being shown multiple things at the same time. Imagine you are watching a film where every other frame is from one movie, while the other frames are from a different movie. I hope that makes sense. It felt like I was experiencing 2 different things at the same time. Like they were blended so well I couldn't really distinguish between the 2 at times. What I felt I learned was that life is never truly ending, and the most important thing is your soul, or as consciousness. Basically, the higher the frequency your consciousness resonates at, the better for soul in the next life, and the lower the frequency, the worse for your soul. Basically, the higher the frequency your consciousness resonates at, the better for your soul in the next life, and the lower the frequency, the worse for your soul. I was never under the impression this was like heaven or hell, but more about what you do once you have passed from this life, and the more on to the next life. Basically, you are soul that is taking physical form to experience this thing called life, and you have done it multiple times, and will do it multiple more. There was a lot more information to explain, but it's just too much information to take in. Anyways, around midnight, my friends had tried calling my cell phone because they had thought I had just left without saying goodbye to anyone. When I didn't answer, they went to see if my car was still parked in the parking lot, and they thought maybe I was on my phone with my girlfriend or something. Instead, they found me, lying stomach down in the parking lot, and it was now raining. It was so weird, but I remember someone asking me if I was okay and telling me everything would be all right as my friends were helping me up. It wasn't them talking because I could hear the voices. This was a different voice from them, more of an internal and or telepathic voice. So they took me inside and I really was out of it, kind of scared, really embarrassed, and overall didn't know what to say. All in all, I had been outside for 2 hours, but the time felt so much different to me. In ways, it felt like weeks had gone by, while in others, it felt like maybe 5 minutes. While this experience is ingrained into my mind, it is hard to actually articulate in any real sense. It was just too much to take in and make semblance of, while also kind of being reminded of feelings and truths you have always known, but are typically forgetting. I had not taken drugs or anything like that and had only had a couple of beers earlier that evening, while on the lake. Because of this experience, I did try DMT on 2 separate occasions, years later, because it was the only thing I had heard of that sounded like it could produce something similar. While both of those experiences were wild and very insightful, they were nothing like the 2009 experience. In 2009, there were no crazy colors or fractals or anything like what I experienced using DMT. In 2009, that was like being guided through the very essence of life, while simultaneously wandering through the universe and looking at very realistic galactic bodies. I can't say it was aliens that caused this, but it was an unbelievable experience that has had both positive and negative weight that has carried with me to this day. Story 39. I already posted a comment regarding my personal story, but seeing another has reminded me of a story told to me by my family friends. As it's not my story, I can't account for the validity of it, but I still found it really interesting. These are family friends that we've had for years and been on multiple trips with. Completely normal family from LA that I would never, ever picture exaggerating or making up these events. They have a daughter my age, late 20s, and she was the first one to mention this encounter to me out of the blue when we were teenagers. She wasn't present when it happened and told me her parents are still super uncomfortable with what happened and don't talk about it with basically anyone. But I'm pretty nosy and really interested in this stuff, so I decided to bring it up one night at dinner with our families. It was clear that they both became incredibly uncomfortable and weren't sure how to tell the story without seeming insane. It was like they were reluctant to say anything about it at all, even to family friends of over 20 years. They were driving late at night through Arizona back to California from some sort of road trip. They were kind of isolated, but also not crazy far from a town. While they were in the car, they both witnessed the classic triangle formation of 3 bright lights. They at first thought it was a plane and became concerned, thinking it was flying way too low to the ground. They continued on with this thing ahead of them until the dad decided to stop, get out of the car, and actually try to figure out what was going on. The last thing both of them remember is stepping out of the car. Very early the next morning, they woke up in a motel about 20 minutes from where they had stopped in their car. Their car was in the parking lot. Their suitcases were open and their clothes were folded into the drawers. They obviously freaked out and were incredibly confused. The dad went to the lobby and basically asked the front desk attendant what had happened, or how or when they checked in. The attendant was still on his overnight shift and was actually the same guy who checked them in. He was obviously confused as to why the dad was asking all of this, and then became concerned, asking if there was something wrong, but they decided to check out and leave as soon as they were told about the previous night. The attendant said they had checked in during the middle of the night, that everything was completely fine, and that they had paid with their credit card that was still on file for incidentals. My next question would have been to see security footage of them checking in, but they just decided to leave, and it seems like the situation was barely talked about. Like they were both so upset but also just needed to let it be. I understand this next part seems nuts, but I've actually witnessed this part myself. Apparently, about a week later, the dad was getting his hair cut, and the stylist asked what happened to the back of his ear. He had a straight line or a scar that was slightly reddened and was obviously new. I saw the scar myself, and at present it was just a white line like a normal older scar. That's where the story ended. Again, this isn't my story, so I can't argue for how true it is. All I can reiterate is that these are probably the 2 last people I would expect to have a story like this. I also have to say that I was taken aback by both of their reactions when I brought this up. It was like all of a sudden this funny, outgoing couple became quiet, fearful and embarrassed and scared just telling the story. At one point, I thought the mom was going to start crying. The biggest reason I felt comfortable asking about it in the first place was because of their usual lighthearted, easygoing selves. After that night, the story was never brought up again, and I never heard any more information about it. It was clear that these two just wanted to avoid these memories at all costs and move on, even if they still have no idea what happened. Story 40. Not sure if this was an alien, but I'll tell it anyway. In high school, I lived with my dad for a while in his big old house. We're from Denver, so it was a residential neighborhood, but still in the city. My mom was out of town, so we were watching her little panicky dog. I fell asleep with her on the bed, watching TV on my laptop, which had a dead battery and only worked when plugged in. The door to my room locks, and was locked from the inside this night. The only way to unlock it from outside was with a key, which I kept in the room with me. Anyway, fast forward to the middle of the night. Bitsy, Mom's ridiculous dog, starts going off, just barking her throat out and terrorized at the end of my bed. I look up and can barely see in the dark. The only light is coming from my laptop, but it's facing me. I barely make out someone standing at the foot of my bed right next to the door. I'm yelling at Bitsy to stop and assume this figure is my dad. I'm all confused, asking him what he's doing. I check the clock and it's past 4 a.m. now. So I ask again, what the heck is he doing? He's just standing there so late. The dog is still going off and there's no response from him. I realize two things. One, the door is locked from the inside. I ask how he even got in. No response. As I'm asking this, I realize the second thing. This figure is taller than my doorway. Easily a few feet taller than my dad. All sleepiness is immediately washed away. I grab my computer and twist it to lighten the side of the room. For a very quick moment, it lit the figure up before the cord unplugged, and I sat again in darkness. It wasn't enough time to really see it, but years later this image is just as clear in my mind. The dog still growling, and I scrambled for my phone to use its flashlight, turned the lights on, and of course, it's gone. I never went back to sleep that night, and the dog continued grumbling until the sun came up. The next morning I asked my dad, knowing the answer, if he'd come into my room for any reason. I told him the story, which he assumed I might have dreamed. I know what sleep paralysis is like. This was entirely different. I was wide awake and really saw this thing, and wouldn't have if it weren't for the dog. I haven't seen anything like it since. As far as those lights go, people keep talking about. My parents both swear the same details of a night they were out driving and saw 3 orange lights moving slowly in the sky. They followed them up until they had to get on the highway and followed them to Boulder. Along the way, they supposedly changed formations occasionally. This was years before I was born. Then a few years ago, my friends and I were in the mountains for the 4th of July. We weren't anywhere near fireworks, but we could see them all along the horizon. At one point, someone points out some lights in the sky just northwest of us. Same thing. A triangle of orange lights moving freely around. One light would occasionally blink out here and there, then come back. They stayed in a certain vicinity, almost as if slowly dancing in the sky. Everyone saw it and started freaking out, even the neighbors around us. My dad, conspiracy theorist, always talked about how the 4th of July was a great time for them to visit us. We're all drunk, distracted, and there's already lights in the sky. The next day, all these articles came out about skydivers causing the lights, and no one needed to worry about any UFOs. I remain a bit skeptical because I've been skydiving. It takes 2 to 4 minutes tops, hurling straight at the ground. These things swayed in the sky for 15 or so minutes, then flew east. I also thought of those floating paper lantern things, but again that didn't seem right, especially since the city already tried to explain the reasoning. Anyway, not sure what I believe in, but it's all kind of weird. The universe is so much bigger than us, so I almost find those entirely denying alien existence way more ridiculous than those who insist they've been abducted. None of us know for sure. Why argue? Story 41. Repost from another thread. This happened to me. Something I rarely speak of, but which has dramatically changed the course of my life. It's hard to put into words, and the emotions are still so intense. So writing is rather clumsy for this post, and I do apologize. I was 22 and in college. I still haven't fully recovered. November 23rd is the day it happened. I lived in the country. One side of the street had a small strip of houses with farmland behind, houses further apart than a typical street. Across the street was farmland, then wilderness, all the way to the mountains. Pretty isolated, unfamiliar neighbors. The backyard wasn't fully enclosed. The house had been expanded in years past, so what used to be the back patio had been turned into a greenhouse room, made entirely of windows. I lived alone. I'd gotten home from a night out with friends in the nearest city, about 30 minutes away by freeway. It was sometime after 2 a.m. I hadn't had anything to drink that night because I had been going kind of hard lately in college and wanted to take it easy. I came inside, greeted my cats. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I went into my bedroom and flopped down on my bed, which was nothing more than a mattress on the ground pushed up against a corner of the bedroom. Sophisticated college living, I know. At that time, I used to keep my bedroom door open. I'm laying on my back as I drift off to sleep. I wake. I immediately notice two things. The first is an ambient light the way dawn looks through a window, but it was still dark in the room. Second, there is something very near me. I was on my back in bed. This thing was situated near my waist at the side of the bed. I couldn't tell if it was standing and was only 3 feet tall or was sitting. I only remember the face. It was gray, large, black eyes, but not as large as they make them in the movies and media. Almond-shaped, some sort of scales or pigmentation which looked like very aggressively furrowed eyebrows. I felt it from an intense, hateful, malevolent sensation. It wanted to hurt me. I don't know how, but I knew that from the feeling it emanated, but I knew. I didn't have an emotional response at first. I was too shocked. Then I managed to utter a combination of whoa and okay, which came out as whoa, okay, as I put my hands up defensively and moved my body away from it. Slamming into the wall as I did so, I didn't have time to feel any panic or terror before the type of hand came up and hit me in the head. My vision was awash in a world of gray milkiness with dark gray veins interspersed. I could move it so it wasn't sleep paralysis. It felt too real to be a hallucination, especially since it wasn't anything near what I was dreaming about upon waking. I don't have sleep apnea, so I wasn't experiencing loss of oxygen to my brain, though I have entertained these as possible explanations. None suffice because the experience doesn't fully meet all of the criteria of any of the phenomena. The next thing I remember is trying to wake up, but being extremely disoriented, like when you've been under anesthesia and you're trying very hard to wake up, but you can't snap out of it. I'm panicking while trying to wake. I finally snap out of it. I immediately vomit and begin sobbing uncontrollably, but I'm too scared to close my eyes again. There's blood from me rubbing them to keep them open. By the time I'm able to stop crying, it takes me an hour to build up the courage to get out of bed. I grab a bat and begin clearing each room, trying to avoid panicking. There is no one here. No signs of forced entry. My cats were terrified of me until I sat down and put on a hat. I'm bald and have dark circles under my eyes now, so if they saw this thing too, the similarity might have made them scared of me. The aftermath was and is the hardest part. For 5 days I couldn't return home. I stayed with other people and my ex-girlfriend would feed the cats. I finally returned home, sitting in my car in my driveway for a couple of hours, my cats peeking through the curtain to meow at me. I kept a knife taped to my back, one in my pocket and a bat by my side, and phone with the flashlight app always nearby. I rearranged all my furniture to see all the doors and windows. I noise booby-trapped all the rooms. I would panic if I tried to sleep at night. I developed a caffeine addiction. For the rest of my time in college, including graduate programs, I lived on a night schedule. I did not sleep until the sun came out. I never left the lights off and did not go outside of my house after dark for 5 years. No exceptions. I would stay out after dark with friends or at school, but would not return home until the sun was up. I have been unable to close my eyes voluntarily for anything longer than a blink without fear setting in. I slowly was able to push myself out of necessity for work, back to sleeping at night and maintaining a more healthy lifestyle. But I'm frequently late to work and most often exhausted throughout the day. To this day, I still have an incredible amount of fear about falling asleep at night. I still arrange furniture tactically. I still keep a weapon near me at all times. I was never able to return to the state of physical health and confidence I had before this. I sought help and was referred to a psychologist. Despite me being one, I sought out people who claimed to have had similar experiences. They mostly were mentally unsound or selling something. You don't have to believe me. The story is out there. It feels interesting to express it in a public forum. Story 42. I wasn't abducted, I think, and I know this is going to get buried, but I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to tell someone who may actually believe me. A few months ago, I was getting home from work at about 1 a.m. and listening to music on my headphones as I was getting out of my car. I was changing songs on my phone when I glanced up to see 3 lights in a triangular formation perfectly still directly above me. In the moment that I looked at it, I knew it wasn't of this earth. It just had this eerie presence and unnatural stillness to it, as if not even the atmosphere or the wind conditions had any effect on its position. Within that moment, my body froze and I was overcome with an intense slew of emotions from wonder to fear to paranoia. It just felt like nothing else I'd ever looked at. And in that same instance, it started to glide effortlessly across the sky and over the horizon in 4 seconds flat. It was just gone. I still can't even describe how large it was or what it really looked like or how high in the sky it was. I just had no reference for what I was looking at. I just know it was big, incredibly flat, and it was below the clouds. It was almost like a plane in geometry, as if the lights were fixed to a flat geometric plane that sliced like a blade through the sky, without any kind of interference from any outside conditions at all. It moved like it was a point on a graph plotting a perfectly straight line to its next destination. It glided so effortlessly and smoothly that I didn't even recognize how quickly it was going until I realized I could no longer see it over the horizon. Between the lights, I could tell there was a structure connecting them, but there was no outline, and it was as if I could see straight through it. Crap, it could have been that technology was so advanced that the lights themselves may have been independent of one another, but so precisely engineered and positioned that they appeared to be all one cohesive structure. But I honestly have no explanation for it. Until that day, I had seen some things which I had thought may be UFOs, and my mind had a reasonable doubt to the existence of aliens on Earth. But after what I saw, I am undoubtedly 100% convinced of their presence. Some days I think back on what I saw and wonder where that craft is, or how many more there are, or what their purpose here is. But I don't think we'll ever know. And knowing the pure terror and paranoia that the sight of that thing has caused me, I'm not sure I'd even want to know anymore. Holy smokes, guys. How are we feeling? I will admit, okay, I'm a skeptic, but I'm an open-minded skeptic. And I was trying not to interject on any of these stories. I wanted the material to speak for itself. And there's a lot of through lines here, all right? There's a lot of things that seem to be appearing, a pattern that goes on with all these people. It really makes you think. And if you guys have any stories like that, please drop them down below, okay? I want to read, I want to be invested, I want to believe. And of course, that concludes our stories today. And thank you again for listening along with me, and we will see you in the next episode.